Mike Turbo Hughes, thank you very much for joining me on episode 9 of Between the Levees. Let's start off where it began. Where were you born, sir?
I was born in uh, Rhineland Falls, Landstuhl, Germany. Dad was in the military. He was stationed in a little satellite base of Landstuhl. He was in the army, and I was born there. They didn't have a small little base. They didn't have a supply depot back near Vietnam. In '71, they didn't have a hospital there on base. So I was actually born in a civilian hospital in Rhineland Falls, Germany.
What was your father's MOS in the military?
Signal Corps. He was basically a. You ever watch Radar O'Reilly on MASH? That's pretty well it. Funny story to that is Dad got drafted, fresh out of college, and he got drafted, and he was dating my mother, and he basically asked my mother to marry him. He always said because he knew she came from modest upbringings, and he figured that she could use his life insurance when he went to Vietnam and got killed easier than anybody else. But true story, that's what he always said.
Yeah.
And so he asked her to marry him, and he went through basic and came home, and then he went through AIT and down in Texas, and they were training in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
And they came out one day, and it was rainy, it was nasty, and he said he really didn't want to go crawl through the mud again. And they asked if anybody had any clerical skills. Well, during college, my dad worked at the rec center to pay his way through college. Renting pool balls and bowling shoes and things like that, and resetting the bowling machines. And worked evenings, and he found he could make a lot of extra money with a portable typewriter typing term papers. So
Yeah.
he typed term papers for like a nickel a page or whatever it was back in the day. And he got really good at typing. And he had college. So when they asked if anybody had any clerical skills, he said, you learn not to volunteer for anything in the army, but he said anything had to be better than crawling through the mud.
Sure.
So he raised his hands and he got in there and he said they set him down in front of a brand new IBM Selectomatic. And he said he'd never even touched an electric typewriter. And he said he found out he could fly.
Yeah.
And they heard him typing. And they actually came over and they kind of separated him out and took him over and introduced him to Roger, the guy he'd be working for. The guy was kind of interviewing, I guess you'd say, for a clerk. And he was a colonel. And he said he was getting ready to be deployed to Germany. And his aide or clerk or whatever that is had rotated out, and he needed somebody, and they had a little conversation. And Dad took a few little exercise tests and all, and the guy liked him and took him with him. And that's where Dad spent his time, was in Germany, basically being I don't know if he was a personal clerk to the guy or like a company clerk or whatever, but that's what he did. Was he processed all the paperwork, which he said he found out wasn't a bad gig. He said when you're in a supply depot and you're the guy processing the paperwork, he said you get a lot of leeway because he said papers can either go on the top or the bottom of the pile real quick.
Right.
So that was the long story about how I ended up here. And of course, in '70, I was born in '71. In '72, they came back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And
How long was he in the service?
whatever your standard draft time was back in, somewhere between 2 and 3 years.
Okay.
He didn't re-up again. He thought about it, but that Roger, that guy he worked with, couldn't guarantee that they stay, out of the war. And he said the conflict then was, pretty highly escalated, and he figured he wouldn't want to push fate. He'd take
Sure.
take his one out.
Sure. What did your mom do growing up?
For a long time, stay-at-home mother. When my dad got back from the military, he his degree, his college degree, was in agricultural business, and first took a job with the Job Corps, which is what he had before he left, as an instructor. And he always wanted to farm, so he came back and invested in some land. My family always had a small farm,
Mm-hmm.
and he bought like 500 acres. And back in the day, it was a lot. Him and my uncle farmed that, and then he gave up that job, went full time farming, and then he became president of the Farm Bureau in the '70s.
Okay.
Somewhere in the late '70s, around '74 to '76, I can't remember exactly when. I was a little kid. He went broke farming. And that was before FDIC type. I don't know what the initials are for the farmers insurance after the Wayne and Cripe deal in the '80s.
Mm-hmm.
But he went. He was playing his grain in the commodities some way. And farmers, a lot of times could defer their payments out to interest only for so many times. And he was banking his money and banking his grain through the '70s. And I mean, things were looking good. And he went to the elevator and he talked to the guy. And I said, "Look, Mike," he said, you know, prices are going through the roof. He said, I'd hold on. And
Yeah.
so dad came home, and him and one of his farmer buddies talked about it. And he said, the other guy said, I don't feel right about it. He said, I'm going to get mine out. He said, I just don't feel like he said, I'm nervous. And Dad said, well, he's always been good to us. He said, I'm going to ride it out. Of course, Dad was young, college educated, cocky. He was going to make it big. You know how that is.
Yeah.
And my dad was a good businessman. My dad, before he died, made a pretty good fortune just, dabbling in this and that. But, like all good businessmen, especially when you're young, you take a few too many risks. And he took a few too many on that one. And I never will forget the next day that friend of his came flying up the driveway in a 4-door green Chevy Nova, and came flying up in the yard. And we were all wondering what was going on because I was a little kid now, little kid. And Dad jumped in the car and took off. And I remember he came back after dark and seen the lights come up the driveway real slow. And true story, not being dramatic, this is the only time in my history that I ever seen my father truly cry. I seen him get pretty choked up one time over one of his dogs that I ran over, but I really seen him cry. He got out of the car, he walked up. My mom was sitting on the porch steps. He fell down on his knees, put his head in her lap, and cried like a baby.
Yeah.
And we lost we lost over $100,000 worth of grain in one afternoon. And so that was the end of the farming. My dad did a few businesses here and there.
How old were you at the time?
Oh, probably 4, maybe 5. Because we moved down here on the family farm when I was 7. And Dad tried a few businesses for a couple of years and moderate success. But the late 70s was a tough time economically. And high interest rates, and whatever, anybody that looks back or old enough to remember knows the 70s were a lot tougher times than what we're actually experiencing right now with gas prices. And
yeah,
we had farm embargoes on grain and things like that. So he carved out a little bit of this, that, and the other, and he had to have a job. And he took a job with the state of Illinois Department of Corrections. And another one of them luck of fates, I guess if you want to call it that way, on your luck rides on somebody else's tragedy. Shortly after he took a job with the Department of Corrections, which wasn't a high-paying job, they had that big riot up there at one of the prisons up north in Illinois, and a few guards got killed. And all of a sudden, the union, or kicked in, or however it happened, and I mean, prices shot up. So those jobs all of a sudden became pretty lucrative. And living in Illinois, I live in extreme southern Illinois. I'm sitting right here now, standing at the back door, looking out my window at the river.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a couple thousand feet from Kentucky. And if you look at the way Illinois is, I dip down into Kentucky. We relate more to that cross section than we do to Illinois. But everything in Illinois is not segregated out. So all your state jobs and things like that are based on your standard cost of living per state. Well, we got Chicago and Cook County. So, right now, rent up there is $2,000 and $3,000, I'm sure, just by looking at what prices are where you're at in Nashville and things. So when you come down here in a rural farming area, and Illinois has got either the second or third largest prison system in the United States, next to California and New York, because obviously we're one of the biggest cities, which generate a lot of criminals.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't put prisons in big cities. You put prisons in rural areas, and where you got plenty of land.
Right.
All the prisons are back in southern Illinois, down here where I live, in the rural areas, and they're all based on pay for average pay in the state. Well, those bigger cities up there, St. Louis, Champaign, Chicago, Springfield, they run the cost of living way up. So we live a relatively cheap cost of living down here, where there's 3,400 people in the county I live in, and there's 650 people in the town I live in. It's the only town in the county, and it's one of the largest counties square area wise in the state. So we get a nice little rural life. You've heard about, if you've ever been around hunting or fishing, you've heard about Polk County and the Ohio River, Smithland Pool.
Mm-hmm.
So we live a pretty farm-based rural existence. And these guys that get these jobs with like the state, benefit from a pretty high. So anyway, the 80s was good to my father. He made good money, had a few side businesses, always had a side hustle. We got a family campground my grandpa's bought it in 37. It's right here on the Ohio River. We own a pretty good tract of land along the river. So Dad developed the campground into more of a modern, from an old fishing camp, where you got a bunch of old guys sitting around drinking beer, running trot lines, and using the outhouse, to more of what you would think of a family campground, cabins and stuff. He developed that, hit a few good businesses, got a few good advisements from stock market and rode that through the 80s and 90s. And when he passed away in 15, he left a pretty good little nest egg for my mother.
Yeah.
So pretty successful in life. And when you look back, it's all those little forks in the road where things look dark that always determine your path to the future. Sometimes I remember that Morgan Freeman was in that movie with Jim Carrey, Bruce Almighty. And
Mhm.
if you look at that DVD, Tim, and you watch the extra scenes, the deleted scenes, God's trying to show Bruce how he messed up
Mhm.
when he granted everybody's prayers and how that ain't a good thing. And he's showing him all these different things where he messed up. And Lee looks over and he sees a picture of Lance Armstrong winning the Tour de France. And he said, "But did I do that?" He said, "No, no, that was me and him." And he said, "Well, but he had cancer or whatever, And he said, "What I'm trying to tell you is it takes some mighty dark pictures to paint a bright. It takes some mighty dark colors to paint a bright picture."
Sure.
You kind of look at an old Terry Redland picture or a who's that guy that does the Christmas backgrounds and stuff. They always make, Thomas Kincaid. When
Okay.
you look at their pictures, you see the light so bright, but you don't realize the picture. You're not seeing a glowing light. You're just seeing a white or red or yellow with a bunch of dark backgrounds.
Right.
And so I think that's something that I've seen in my career. I'm sure you've seen it in yours. When you're in the heat of it and you're looking forward at a fork in the road, some of those are some of the darkest times in your life. Some of the most depressing, some of the most frustrating. You're stuck someplace or you're in a rut. But when you get out of it and you look back 5, 10 years later, it really wasn't that long of a snapshot in time. And the lessons you learned from it and the things you benefited from where you were at have really prepared you for,
Whatever's
the
next.
success you generated. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, what's your mother up to these days?
Back she used her time after we got in school through the 80s and she educated herself. And she got several uh, degrees in child care, child psychology,
Okay.
and she ended up working in the school department. My grandmother was during the 80s, during the Nancy Reagan times. My dad's mother she was in my dad's mother was something else now. She was she was a wannabe. She was she was the person that wanted to turn a, a sow's ear into a silk purse. And so she was into all the lodges and all this stuff. And some way around, she got on the board of directors when they started up the Head Start program. And my mother fell into that due to her education. And that's what got my mom started down that road of education.
Mhm.
And mom ended up as a teacher with Head Start. And then she ended up working in the administration field. She ended up being a coordinator, which is like a principal for Head Start. And then she transferred in the public school system. And she's semi-retired now, but she still works with autistic kids,
Mhm.
um, things like that. She I think the last gig she had out there was, because like I said, she's semi-retired now, especially since my dad passed. But they assigned somebody with like a developmentally challenged child to help it through school, and so she goes and helps it get on the bus, follows the person through their day,
Mhm.
helps them with any developmental issues they might have, and she does that until they either reach the peak of their development or, you know, finish grade school. She don't go into high school and stuff. She does like up through fifth grade, I think, something like that. And
Sure.
so she finds that satisfying because she gets to work with one individual and watch them succeed. So many times for a while she got into the I guess you'd say the I don't know how to say it. It was like the DCFS, and she was a site coordinator where she would go out and or a site assessment or something. I can't remember what it's called, but she was the person that went to the house to find out if the child when the complaints were made to check on the child.
Right.
And she said that was I remember when she done that. She done it for like 2 years, and she just stressfully could not handle it going into some of these environments that these children are being raised in, and
Yeah.
and trying to make a determination: is this just a honest? Is this just a family just struggling, and the kid's not in any danger, or is that's a lot of stress. And she tried that for a little while, but so she's basically been into child development and stuff like that, and I think now I don't know that she's done anything in the last probably 2 years. My mom's like a big child within herself. A
Yeah.
lot of times to a fault. I mean, bless her heart, she's a lot of times just too gullible. She loves people too much. She's one of them eternal optimists that everybody's a good person.
Yeah.
you know, and that was not you got to be a little tougher to be in that environment. My mom's more of a caregiver and a nurturer rather than go in and make a determination on those kind of things because she just couldn't live with it.
What about siblings?
I got one brother. One brother. He's always worked pretty much in the coal industry. He's dabbled in a few things, but he works up here in Southern Illinois. He worked for years for Kerr McGee Coal, which the Glacier mine up here became Bob Murray Coal, Murray Energy, and they got towboats and stuff. And yeah, he the last job he had. I think he's back. If he hasn't retired, he's fixing to because he got a business proposition he wants to go into with selling equipment and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He moved up by St. Louis up into a little place called Redbud, I think it is, and he works up there at that Prairie State Power Plant. It's one of them new uh, power plants that kind of on the green. I think it is when they opened it. I think it was like one of the greenest fossil fuel power plants. Sits right on top of the coal mine. They mine the coal out from under the plant and send it up. There's no transportation of it and stuff. Pretty high tech deal. And he was a mine manager up there, worked underground.
Okay. Well, I grew up right outside New Orleans, so I imagine our upbringings were a little bit different. What was it like growing up?
Well, I'm gonna tell you, when my dad went broke farming through the '70s, it was gosh damn rough.
Sure.
Typical rural American farm life. The little area I was at was always about 20 years behind. So if you want to know what it was like growing up in Golconda here, the little town I live in, just turn on an episode of Andy Griffith. And I'm not joking. I mean, right down to the comedy. There's not one person. I'm a big fan of Andy Griffith, and I watch pretty well daily. And there's not one person that I can't remember somebody when I was growing up. Right now we lived up on the when I was young there before we moved to the family farm down here in the middle of the county. We lived up northern end of the county up there, and there was a little between Golconda, the only town really, and there's a few wide spots in the road that might have a stop, but really the only place to even buy a soda pop in this county is Golconda.
Mm-hmm.
But about halfway between where we lived and Golconda, a little old store back in the day that a friend of my dad's, guy Rose, and Rose's Grocery. And it was the typical old shotgun building, deli in the back, one man ran it, no air conditioning, potbelly stove. You'd go in there in the wintertime, that old potbelly stove would be just roaring, and within 5 foot of the stove, you'd be burning up, and over in the corner of the place, you'd have to look and make sure everything wasn't froze. Uh, you know, no air conditioning, fans going. It had the old wooden screen door that had the colonial bread or bunny bread or Coca-Cola or whatever, the little metal thing on the front. You'd walk in and be barefoot, and no shirt on, a pair of shorts as a kid, and you'd always tell you get a sucker on the way out. It was like the old what you'd see on the Waltons or something, the old country store. You'd hear the screen door creak when you open it, and back in the back, you had a deli, and I always remember because we'd go in there and he'd make you. He wouldn't just sell lunch meat. He'd make you a sandwich. So we'd go in and we'd all get a sandwich for lunch if we were there on the farm or something. Going passing through, and sold the bottles of pop out of the cooler that you slid open and had the bottle opener on the side, and so you get a glass bottle of pop. It was that kind of environment. Very rural, very farm based, but very poor. I mean, we didn't have a lot. When Dad went broke farming, he didn't declare bankruptcy. He went to all the banks and he told them, "Look, we can do this one or two ways." He said, "I can declare bankruptcy and you don't get nothing." Or he said, "You can bear with me." He said, "I promise you." He said, "I don't know when it'll be, but he said, I will pay you every dime I owe you." And we struggled there until we just couldn't make it. Dad finally got that job with the state. We sold off the farm, sold off all the equipment, moved down here onto the family farm where my grandparents lived, into that fishing camp. And remember,
how old were you at that point?
This all started somewhere between 4 and 6 years old, and it went all the way through till I was early preteen, probably 12, 14. Right. I remember when it ended. I don't remember when it began. I'd have to ask my parents, my mom, my dad's dead, but I'd have to ask my mom for the exact dates. But I know Dad went to work for the state in either 77 or 78. So, and it was only so I'd say 76 or so is when that, grain crash happened. And, and we'd bought cattle. So we bought cattle high, and then all of a sudden the grain fell out, cattle are low. I mean, it was just a perfect storm of a mess. And,
right.
And my dad had us knee deep in the middle of all of it. And so when we finally went through all that mess, and it was very humbling. It really brought us together as a family. My dad never, he worked all the time. He always had side hustles. He owned fish markets. He owned restaurants, catering things. I mean, gas stations. He owned two gas stations back then, service stations, garages. On the side. Uh, Worked all the time. So we never really seen Dad much unless we were working with him.
Hmm.
When he wasn't doing that, he was hunting, and literally there was a few years there that pretty much if it wasn't walking before we put it on the table, we didn't eat it. But he never took a handout, never took money from my grandparents. The only thing he ever took was my grandfather gave him a little cabin down here, and that was, you know, a little cabin on the river with an outhouse and a cistern, no running water. We had no sink in the house, and that was one of the last things we got was toiletry, because there again he put all of his money to paying off that debt. And in 1986, we all got in the car or the truck and we all loaded up and we drove to Ridgeway. And my father paid the last bank, the last bit of money that he owed him. And that's when life started getting better for us. Is because then he put all his money into fixing up a house, and then he started developing that campground. And we got city water in to where we had running water, and finally got toilets and all that stuff. So I went the better part of my youth there from about, let's say, 5 years old to about 10 or 12 years old, that we literally didn't even have an indoor plumbing. At some point we did, but you had to flush with a bucket, because our water came out of a cistern and it wasn't big enough to put a pump in, And then we made those cisterns bigger, dug a bigger one, and then we started hauling water. So life slowly got better over that 10-year period. But that 10-year period, I mean, it was rough because, like I said, Dad was the type that he was not going to take charity. He wasn't going to take a handout, and he wasn't going to leave the banks and go on bankruptcy. He was going to pay back everything he owed, and that was our sole mission. I mean, we didn't do nothing. We lived a lot poorer than what my dad's paycheck reflected.
Right.
Just because, and people didn't really realize that we did that out of choice, because my dad was going to pay back his debt. He was not going to. He was not going to walk away from anything.
And you said it was 86 when he paid it off and things started turning around?
Yep.
You know what
86.
You know what else happened in 86?
Was that you were born?
Yes, sir.
Well, there you go.
Very good year.
I remember shortly after that, of course, the first thing we done was dug a lot bigger cistern, got a well, actually drilled a well where we had good water. So we started modernizing everything, thank God. And, it's the little things. That didn't take long, a few months, after we got straightened up. And because slowly, as he started paying those banks off, we started living better. I mean, it wasn't like everything was that first couple of years. We lived a little better as it goes on. I'm kind of condensing 10 years into, a minute or two. But when it finally did all get off of his back, I remember the first big thing we done was one Christmas he came in and we went down and he bought a big one of the old, if you remember them, 12-foot fiberglass satellite dishes back in the early days of satellite television.
Okay.
And we bought our first color television. It was a big 27-inch cabinet Zenith, had stereo, remote control. Oh my God. And we got a top loading 4-head VCR.
All right.
Oh, I think he paid like $800 for these. And that was our big. And I remember him telling us, we went out and we went out to eat, and we went over to the store and we bought that stuff. And he told us, he said that he apologized to my mother for everything we'd been through and how we'd worked, and we were going to start trying to live a little better. And the first thing he got us all was entertainment. So
Gotcha.
it was good. It was a good way to grow up. It made you appreciate. And I tell you what it did do. I never tried, and this is not. I never tried to to live above my means. Somebody was talking the other day. Now we've got where I work has got programs. When we take a deck in and bring them into the wheelhouse, we've got financial counseling if they want to, because we're actually doubling somebody's income right off the bat.
Yeah.
When I went from pilot or mate to pilot, I actually took a cut and pay because I went to a different division of our company. But when I moved into the wheelhouse, I never lived any different. I always lived the same. I live in the same house that I moved in. My grandparents' house. They died in 85 and 87, and they had a house here in the center of the farm. And I graduated high school in 89, and my dad gave me my grandparents' old house. My wife still live here today. I'm on our third remodel, hopefully our last. We finally done this one right.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never had a house payment. I've never had a nice fancy house. You know, it's a nice place to live. It's a good house. Built me a nice garage. Only had about 3 new vehicles in my life. Usually I buy used, and that's kind of the way my dad raised me. My dad went through a time when they had no money. He never grew up real rich, but my grandfather, pretty all right.
Right.
But he went from all right to nothing, and then build himself back up to all right. And then, when he got the kids out of the house, made some good investments through the 90s, he retired, fairly well off. I mean, not rich, but, very comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
He retired at 52 years old, if that tells you anything. He retired at 52 and lived very comfortably up until he passed. And I think that kind of stuck with me. I've never been one to try to live above my means.
Right.
So there again, that's one of those things that, when you look back, somebody looked at and go, "Oh my God, that's so tragic," because you had to use an outhouse, or you had to use a bucket in the house when it was too cold or at night or something. You'd be surprised what those things teach you, Tim.
Yeah, no, it does add some perspective for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, so you said you graduated high school in 89. What was your academic career? Were you drawn to anything in school growing up?
No, I pretty well always knew. Well, I knew I was going to do 2 things. My dad wanted me to go to work for the state because, through the 80s there, after my dad got his job with the Department of Corrections, he got his brother a job, his best friend a job, our family did.
Mm-hmm.
And then his other brother went into the parks and recreation side of things. And so my whole family, basically in that time frame, all went to work for the state of Illinois. And that was kind of what I was just assumed to do because that's just what everybody else in the family done. I wasn't drawn there though. I didn't, if you've ever known anybody that's worked in the prison system, that changes people. You're around the worst people in the world in a place they don't want to be.
Right.
And you've seen it in your own life. You typically take on the personality of the type of people that you hang out with every day.
Right.
And so when you're in that kind of environment, you become very cynical. And everybody there's playing the angles, playing the game, and you're there to stop them. So you kind of become hard and jaded and very cynical. I watched my father over my youth change dramatically, and all the people in my family changed, and they were just very hard and skeptical, and not as compassionate as probably should have been. And maybe that's to a good thing to some degrees. I think sometimes we should all be a little more guarded, but I just wasn't feeling it, and I couldn't go to work there until I was 21. But I always, when I was a kid, I sat right there on the river and I played in the front yard every day, and I grew up on the boats, running trot lines, and I grew up in a campground right there on the river, and I always seen them boats. And back in the day, the old locks were still in this lower end of the Ohio, so we had Lock and Dam 51 here, about 2 miles above my house. So there was always a lot of delay there, and I remember all the boats shoved in. And I remember my dad making, I think it was back then, it was like $5 or $10 a trip to go out and pick them all up in a John boat, run them into town to the local bars.
Okay.
That's back when everybody still got off the boats, and bring them back to the boat that night. And so I always liked the boats, and I'd always tell my mom I wanted to do it, and we knew some people that did it. A lot of people in this little community work on the rivers, and so I'd sit there and watch those boats, and I always told my mom, I said, I'm going to do that. So there wasn't no question. I didn't put a lot of energy into high school. Matter of fact, I was not making stellar grades at one point, and not from lack of ability, just from lack of care.
Right.
But the guidance counselor called me in, and her and the principal were concerned. Small town. Remember that? Everybody knows everybody. And she actually had my parents come in, and it was kind of a funny story. She wanted to hold me back another semester the next year. And my dad said, "Why?" And she goes, "Well," she said, this next semester, he's got to pass every class." And Dad said, "Oh, okay." And she goes, "Well, he's never done that." And Dad said, "Well, So if let me get this right, if you hold him back another semester, then he's guaranteed he won't graduate with his class, and he'll graduate midterm next year. She said, yeah. And he said, but if you give him a chance to pass every class and he pulls it off, then he graduates with his class. She goes, well, yeah, but we just don't feel like that'd be there'd be a lot of stress and pressure to put on him.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad looked at her and told him, she said, sign him up for all whatever it was back then, almost 7 classes. And I passed them all.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not with stellar grades, but I passed them all. But I just knew I wasn't going to further my career academically at that point. And so, I graduated May 26th, and I think it was. So I went out with all my buddies. I think 4 of us maybe loaded up in the car, and we all went around putting applications at towing companies.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a call June 3rd. I went down and went through orientation, got on the boat, and been there ever since. I got a call when I was right after I was 21. I was making a lock here right here close, and my dad had chased me down. Back then there wasn't no cell phones, and they were waiting. They said, when I got the lock, which wasn't uncommon back then, they said, is Mike on there? And the captain said, yeah. And he said, well, he needs to get off and call his family. He needs to call home. And I'm thinking, first thing you think is, oh crap, what's, when the locks do that for you, there's a reason,
Right.
And so I climbed up the lock wall and I went and made a phone call. My dad told me, he said, if you want to go to work, you got to get in the bus and go up to the academy Monday. And this was like, I don't know, Friday or Saturday. I'm like, oh crap, So I was basically going to have to jump boat and get the car and go.
Right.
And so I went over to the wall and hollered at the captain. I said, look, I got to make a call. Can you give me a few minutes? He said, I'll give you 15 minutes. I'm leaving. I said, okay. So I called my wife up, and of course, we're young. We got married young. And I asked her, I said, what do you want to do? But when you're that age and look up, you're just a deckhand.
Right.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I think I admire anybody that made a career being a deckhand. But, you're in an entry level position and you're young. And you've seen there's the pressure. Your whole family works in this field, and you're expected to follow in your father's footsteps. Of course, everybody is, I think, to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I never will forget the decision we had to make. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is one of the most critical decisions in our young life. And we made it at 15 minutes at 11 o'clock at night, standing on a lock wall in the middle of the river.
Right.
And, my wife told me, she said, and we talked about that personality change. And there's a reason that people in law enforcement, and if you know anybody in law enforcement or a prison guard or anything, the divorce rate's very high in those fields.
Yeah.
And I know why. I watched my families all go through it. And my wife told me, she said, I don't want to live that way. She said, what you had there was a very well paid, not a high paying, but a very well paying job with the state with good benefits, good medical. At the time they were cream of the crop job if you were, just a normal working guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sitting there, and we had to make, and she told me, she said, we'll do it if you want to. But she said, I just really don't want to live that way. And I said, okay. So I called my dad. I told him, I said, no, I'm done. And he said, you don't know how hard it is to get one of these jobs, son. He said, if you turn it down, he said, you'll never get this offer again. And I told him, I said, well, that's fine. And my dad never really, I don't think, understood that. He never understood what I did. He was always and later in life, toward the end, he started accepting my success. But he never really understood why I didn't follow number one and what everybody else in the family done. Number two, he couldn't understand why I gave up that security,
right,
at something that I had to carve my way out of. Because I had no family in the river, so I didn't have those inherent connections. And then as I did start succeeding, I started making more money than him. I almost think that there was a little bit of my father. You'd have to know my father. I ain't gonna get into all that, but I look back and I think, I don't know if he was really. I think in one way he was proud that I was succeeding, but in another way he didn't like it that I was doing it on my own. Because my dad was truly one of the old school people where he is the patriarch of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one time, and it's probably there again, probably something you put in unless it fits someplace, but one of the biggest arguments me and my dad ever had, and we were down in his basement, playing pool, and he had a discrepancy with a gentleman that had a business, and did a bad paint job. So he was going to just boycott, and we wasn't going to do nothing with the auto parts and the body shop and all this stuff. We're talking small communities around here in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And one day he found out that I went in there and bought some auto parts or something, and he threw a fit. And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Because I told them that I wouldn't grace their door again." I told him, I said, "Dad, I didn't tell them that."
Right.
I don't care what your argument is. And he just could not understand the fact that he boycotted that place and that I went and did business with him.
Right.
And that's the old school way he was is, I'm the head of the family. And if I shut you off, my whole family shuts you off.
Right.
And I didn't live that way. I kind of marched my own thing. So,
Mm-hmm.
that caused its own rifts. But I tell you what, I think I'm a lot better off for carving my own path too. And I think that's something that story I'm talking about is probably not nothing that any young man will have to go through when they make those decisions in life. It's what you do with the rest of your life.
Right. Well, let's back up a little bit. Well, what year? So this was what, like 1990 when you got on deck?
89.
Okay.
I literally I graduated high school May 26th. Got hired or was called to interview June 3rd. Somewhere in the next week, I got on a boat. I'd have to go back and look at what my official hiring date is, sometime in early mid-June. And got on the boat, got on the Steel Pioneer right outside of Paducah. That was with Ingram Barge Company, and I'm still with Ingram.
What was
I
the
did
what was the onboarding process in mid 1989?
much the same as it is now. Maybe not as refined. We had a training program.
Mm-hmm.
I like I said, they called me June the 3rd. I remember that. Sometime in the wrong there, I went in and sit down for a formal interview, and then I had to go down to Nashville and take a pretty stringent physical down there at Vanderbilt. And of course, then I had to wait for the class to start, and they had back then, I don't know, one or two a month where everybody comes in and they go over all the safety systems, and they make sure you can physically carry the rigging
Mm-hmm.
and very similar to what it is today. Now, I mean, it might be refined a little bit because your focus always changes for what's in the need at the time,
Right.
but it wasn't much different. I mean, it was a Monday through Friday orientation, and then when you're done, they send you out on a boat. And I can't remember if it was. We have changed. I don't know if it was 3 days or 5 days. But it was basically a week
Mm-hmm.
of down there and them showing you what the lifestyle was like. We lived on a boat right there at the dock. Uh, I lived on the old Steel Challenger, which is now the Joe B. White, if anybody's seen that boat around. And we they were in for overhaul, and I slept there, and it's very similar. I ain't gonna. I mean, there is some differences, but not as much as what people always want to talk about the good old days. And really, if you really think about it, the good old days ain't that much different than the nowadays.
Right.
People do the same things, but it's very similar. What was taught, the way it was taught, the conditions it was taught was different. The what was put on emphasis, very similar. Even back then, it was always about safety and about proper technique.
Sure.
They taught you how to lift and everything. That ain't as new as people think it is. I think there's a lot more focus on it now, but there was always focus on it even then. So in '89, when I started in, those programs were just getting started, and now we're into a 30-year evolution of those programs.
Right. Now, when you first started, when you got on your first boat, was that fleet or line haul?
Line haul. Line haul was only Robert, what is now the Robert C. Loading. Back then, it was the old Steel Pioneer. It was a boat that Ingram had acquired from Ohio Barge Line. 4,200 horsepower, 168 foot long.
Mm-hmm.
Generally move 15 barges on the Ohio, and then later on the Tennessee River. We got involved in that. We did take it up on the Illinois River one time. Right after I hired in here, we went up and took it on the Illinois River for one summer.
What was your first trip ever?
Where was my first trip? I got on the boat in Paducah. We went down to Great Rivers, Columbus, Kentucky, our big fleet there, which is where it's still at today. Came back up. We turned on the Mid Ohio, went back south, and turned for the upper. Went up the Illinois River, came back down, and that's when they were building the new lock there at St. Louis. and I got off Wayne Lockaway right
Okay. And what was the hitch back then?
there. 30-30. Now
Gotcha.
we do now we do 28 and 28 where we all crew change on the same day of the week.
Right.
Back then it was a little different. I tell you that was, and I know all companies did things different, but back then, it was before the age of cell phones. And so what we try to do is catch the boat when it's going to be at a hub or a fleet,
Right.
you know. So you might crew change on day 29, you might crew change on day 31.
Yeah.
It was kind of, but it was roughly around, what we call a 30-30 schedule. But, you left the office to coordinate your arrival or try to coordinate your arrival. If not, we did crew changes out in the open, but, that was with a marine radio it was hitting a moving target. And
Mhm.
you'd have a marine radio in the van and you're chasing the boat up and down the river, or basically you just go to a town that is in front of the boat and just sit there all afternoon and wait for the boat to show up.
Right.
So, yeah, it was 30-30.
Okay. And then take me through as detailed as detailed as you want your journey from deck to wheelhouse.
Oh boy, that was colorful. Um, I started, like I said, on that Steel Pioneer, and we went a little bit here and yonder, but generally that boat was assigned up there in that Upper Ohio trade, which was the old OBL trade, and uh, we ran up and down the Ohio, but we stayed a lot up there, turning out of DeVosburg and all between DeVosburg and Catlettsburg. So I spent much of my early career as a deckhand on the Upper Ohio. I mean, and I tripped a lot. Back then I think, don't quote me on any of the numbers, but I think I hired in at $61 a day, and they split that in half, or $63 a day, and they split it in half. It was either I hired in at 61 and they split it, or I hired in at 63 and they split it. And it was 31. But so having a young wife, living on my own, being 19 years old, or I started when I was 18, and I met my wife about a year later. So broke and hungry, you rode over a lot. And so I rode everywhere, but I was mainly assigned to that Upper Ohio division.
Mm-hmm.
And I went from the Pioneer. Well, I stayed on there until I jumped boat. And, Ingram was growing back in, the company I worked for.
Mm-hmm.
And so we hired a lot. And so if you hung around, made a good hand, you moved up quick. And the captain I was working for was a good guy. And I was just getting to where he was trusting me to. Back then, we had one radio on the boat, and the man in charge on the radio. And I was just getting to the point where when there wasn't a lead man on or something, he would let me take the radio out. And so I was getting about that point. And I'd been there just a little over a year. And me and my wife, I met my wife, I met Judy somewhere along the way. And there was some stuff going on at home, personal issues. And it just weighed on my mind. And it was August, and it was hot, and it was miserable. And the second mate or lead man or whoever he was on the boat had got sick. So the captain would give me the radio, and I was out there trying to build tow. And basically, the captain just told me, he said, "You put that radio mic right there on your shoulder and do what I tell you, and you'll be fine."
Mm-hmm.
And it was very frustrating. I was very hot, very tired, very miserable. I'd been up a long time. I went from call watch over to trying to run this watch. So here I am trying to build tow. And I had all this other stuff going on. And the mistake we made when we pulled into Catlettsburg Boat Store to get fuel, and I got on the phone and was talking to my wife. And I went back to the boat. And the first barge they were bringing us after we went back out in the fleet, I called up the captain and I said, "Hey, Mark B, maybe, whatever it was." I said, "When that tug comes back," I said, "don't let it leave without me." And we got that last barge put in, and I went back. I threw everything I had, that big green duffel bag, hopped on the tug. Captain tried his best to talk me out of it. And I went back to the boat store. I didn't have any cash. I don't know, maybe a few dollars. And decided I was going to go home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I called my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife now. And I told her what I'd done. I figured she'd be ecstatic and happy. We just got off the phone for like 15 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever it was, telling each other how much we missed and loved each other. And I remember the phone just went quiet. And she said, "You did what?" And I said, I just quit. I'm coming home. And she said, where are you at? And I told her, she goes, how you gonna get home? I said, I don't know, but I'm coming home. So, this is like 2 o'clock in the morning by now. And so I called the house and my mom answered. And I told her what I was doing. And next thing I know, my dad pulled the phone out of her hand and he told her, he said, what the hell did you just do? And I said, I quit. And he said, why? And I told him. And he said, how you gonna get home? And I said, well, that's it. He said, I need somebody to come and get me. He said, you're nuts. And I said, well, I need to get home. And he said, well, he said, son, he said, you're man enough to get out there and ride that boat. He said, you're man enough to make that decision. He said, you're man enough to get home.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally, after all night long of crying and whining, I convinced my mother to get up that morning, drive down to Western Union, and wire a bus ticket to Ashland, Kentucky, but still didn't figure out how I was going to get from Catlettsburg to Ashland.
Mm-hmm.
So I took off hitchhiking, and I got down there to the boat or the bus. That was something interesting. I told them I wanted the first bus out of town. Well, let me tell you, when they try to convince you that you don't always want the first bus out of town, don't take the first bus because there is a bus that runs straight down the West Kentucky Parkway, to Princeton or Paducah area. But no, I took the first bus, and dude, I was everywhere.
Yeah.
I was in between. I went from Kentucky to West Virginia, up into Ohio, down back and forth into Kentucky, bounced back and forth from Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana. I went within 20 miles of the house on the way by to make a big long circle and come back. Almost 24 hours later, I arrived in Paducah, and my dad picked me up in the truck. And, by the time I had a lot of time to think on that way home.
Yep.
And that was not a pleasant car ride home. Matter of fact, my dad asked me, where did I want to go? And let me just say, it wasn't back to his house.
Right.
So I went up to my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, and I showed up at her house. And so now I'm not only without a job, I'm without a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bummed around here doing a few things until we decided to go back, because I realized all them guys on the boat, even to this day, well, I can leave this boat and I can go make a living at McDonald's better. No, you can't. I tried it. Mm-hmm. And I was working a whole lot harder, making a whole lot less. Mm-hmm. And so in the process of all that, me and my wife bumped our date up that we decided to get married. So we were just going to go ahead and do it. And we did, which was another big mistake because it got even harder to make it when you got somebody depending on you.
Right. And
so me and her scratched out a living, and we were living in this house that was my grandparents', and we literally had went in and got cardboard boxes and duct tape and taped up the boxes to make end tables and coffee tables. She had like $18, I think it was, or $30 in the bank. It was 50, she said. She's there beside me. And it's $50. And we went to a yard sale and bought a hide couch. And we drug it home, and when we dropped it off the back of the truck in the yard, cockroaches ran out of it. So we literally threw plastic over it and threw a bomb in it and tried to kill all the roaches and brought it in the house. So we had a hide couch, a bunch of cardboard boxes, and a portable TV that her sister gave us to sit on top of my wife's stereo. And we were married. We set up house. We were starving to death, and we made up our mind to go back on the river. This all happened pretty quick. It wasn't a long time. It wasn't like years later. This was months later. We decided 10 months, she said. And let me tell you, that was a rough 10 months to be 19 years old and decide to get married in. Yeah. And so we went back on the river, and life got good. I could work as much as I wanted. One of the benefits back then, because we were young, when I'd go on the boat, my wife would just shut the house up and she'd go back to her parents. Mm-hmm. And I'd go work as long as I could. And so I worked in that, back to the story, I worked up in that upper Ohio trade. When I hired back in, they put me back in that trade up there. And I think they put me on the old steel forwarder, which was the Chip Lacey. I rode that for just a couple of trips. Then I ended up on the Steel Express. And that was the James Anderson before we sold it to Amherst Madison. My mate that I worked with is Mike White, who's still here today. Matter of fact, me and him were just together this week, and stayed there. And me and the captain had a little dispute, so I got off there and went to the Martha Denton. And that right there was where I really settled into my life on the river.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of those, and everybody that's ever worked on the river that's listening to this will know. You've got good trips and bad trips, and for various reasons. You got people you click with, and there's some crews you go and you don't feel as welcome, and some crews you go you just don't feel as connected. But every once in a while, every now and again, and I've had it happen a couple of times in my career, you get that crew that just clicks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first. I mean, I had the first captain I ever worked with, Captain Les Grimm. He's got a boat runs around down in your area down there that's named
Mm-hmm.
after him. He was probably one of the most influential people in my career. And he was the guy I jumped boat with. And he's also the guy that when I came back to the river, Donald Purdy called and he said, give him another chance. And I met a lot of good people that I'll never forget. But I got on that little Martha Denton. And that crew that we had, I'm not even going to nowadays, I'm not even going to tell you some of the stories about my couple of years on that boat.
All right.
But we had a blast and we just all fit. We stayed together for, well, it was until I, started moving up that I had to move on. But we worked up there turning out of Rosburg through the Pittsburgh end, through the 4 double locks. And it was a little old 2,800 horsepower boat. We turned the big boats. Like I said, it was just one of those moments in your career as a riverman, as a towboater, where that crew just got it. And we stayed together to the point that we stayed together too long, and we were all ready to move on.
Yeah.
And so when we kind of busted up, we all busted up at once and all moved on to bigger, better things. The captain went to a bigger boat, and the mate went to a bigger boat, and the lead man became a mate, and I became a lead man. And so after that, I went and I became a lead man. I started working at that point more down here by this time Ingram was big into the Tennessee River trade. I started working more down here closer to home on the Tennessee River. Pulled trips everywhere. Like I said, I've been, I on my days off, I'd work over and I've rode everywhere. I guess any place the water's wet. I've been to Corpus Christi, Texas. One time we took one of the little boats over and I went over to Pensacola, Florida, taking some rock over there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was the good thing about tripping. When you're a deckhand like that even works to this day. When you trip and fill in, you're going to go everywhere because especially they and everybody in the industry listening knows what I'm talking about. You got this little one-off run someplace that uh, you don't really have something for it, so you just take this boat over here and you crew it up real quick and you go do the run. And I was always right here within 30 miles of the office, so and I like to work, so the crew dispatcher knew that. So I got a lot of those little kind of one-off gigs where hop in the truck, drive down here, get on this boat, and go do this. So that was kind of fun. That went along and trying to think about trying to put the timeline together, Tim. It wasn't long. I guess 92 or so, 93. It happened real quick about this time. I got in the wheelhouse in 95. So I'm going to say it was sometime in 93, late 93, that I made lead man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then that made second mate. And then I had a captain that rode with me that just, I guess, thought I did a great job and put me in for a mate's job. And that happened at the same time. I had another captain that was pushing me to get my license. So all of this kind of happened within just a few months. And so I went and got my license while I was, right about this. It wasn't long after I made mate. Somebody, and I'm not clear as to who or how, but somebody put my name in the hat. Now remember this. I was working on my days off, and by this point, we'll back up just a little bit. I was working on my days off by this point and in the engine room. And I was working down here for the overhauls. But my neighbor was one of the port engineers, and he wanted me to go in the engine room. So he'd stop and pick me up and take me to work every day. Mm-hmm. And so I'd work 12 hours down there in Paducah, overhauling, repowering, just being a deckhand, helping the engineers. And they came to me and approached me about getting in the juniors program and said that this fall they were going to pick some guys. They were going to pick 3 guys. They wanted to know if I said yes. And they said, okay. And that's what my neighbor told me that's what he was going to sponsor me. That's what we're going to do. Okay. Well, I was down there working on. They pulled me off where I wasn't going out and riding the boats anymore. I was just working there. They had a big repower going on with a boat, and I was working on that. Well, they came down one day, and the crew dispatcher came down, and they had a mate for one of those orientations we were talking about, the deck classes for the new hires that hadn't showed up. And Dan Brock had needed somebody to come up and fill in and help. So he came down and asked if I'd go up and help. Well, I did. I was right there at the dock, so I just went up there. And I was sitting out on the porch there, and our port captain at the time came out and sat there beside me. And they were all the trainees were in there watching videos, safety videos and stuff. And I'm sitting outside on the steps, and he sat down beside me and asked me. He said what I was doing. I told him I was down there working, on overalls. And he said, "What are you down there doing that for?" And he remembered me because we had been involved with. There was an incident in a lock a little bit before that, and I was one of the guys that was up there on that little Martha Denton trying to salvage the barges off the lock and stuff. And it was a pretty big deal. And he remembered being my crew from that, and got to know us because he slept there on the heat. He lived with us for like a week. And, so it was one of those things that was somebody you meet along your career that you made an impression on how you worked that, it rung a bell with him and impressed him. Well, when I told him I was going to the engine room, he asked me, so why ain't you going to the wheelhouse? And I told him, I said, well, I don't know anybody. I don't have any. And back then, it wasn't as easy getting a wheelhouse as now. There wasn't as many being made. And this was in the early 90s. And he said, oh, no, it ain't that way. And we talked back and forth. And he said, well, I see what you mean. I said, look, I got to spend money to get those licenses. I got to go down there and do it. And I said, I don't have any help. And I said, my neighbor, he's a port engineer. He's willing to help me. I'm going to go for it. And he told me, he put his hand on my shoulder and he got up. And I never will forget, he said, just remember, he said, if you get them license, and he said, they can't ever take them away from you no matter what position you hold.
Right.
And he said, I think you ought to get it. He said, I tell you what you do. He said, you go get them license. He said, you show me how bad you want it. And he said, I'll see it to it. You get everything you deserve.
Mm-hmm.
So I came home and I was talking to my father, and Dad said, well, son, he said, I never put you through college. He said, why don't you take it? He said, how much would it take? And I said, I don't know. If we did the math, it was a couple $1,000, go down, spend a week or whatever. And so Dad went in his bedroom, came out and laid the money on the table. Well, at first I didn't take it. We left there. My dad's brother came up, stopped by the house, and said, why didn't you do that? And I told him, well, I don't want to be beholden to him. He said, look, he wants to do it. He said, do it. So I went down. I told Dad, so I got the money, and I came up, and this was a Tuesday. Now, see, this is how fast everything happens, and this is how those coincidences and fates all line up, Tim.
Sure.
I called a buddy of mine, the mate that I worked with all the time on that Martha Denton. I tell you about that real good crew. Mm-hmm. I called him up, and I knew he was off the boat. I asked him, I said, Dennis, I said, do you still have that packet for that river school down there in Memphis when you were going to get your license? Yeah, I got it. I said, are you going to use it? And he said, not right now. And I said, can I have it? And he said, yeah, sure. So he went and got it. I called the river school, and I called Miss Betty down there. And I told her, she goes, well, too bad you ain't got everything filled out. She said, I got a cancellation on Thursday. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So I came back home real quick, start filling everything out. And I stopped by the office, and I asked Steve and him about it. And he said, well, we'll see if we can't get everything together by tomorrow. I said, okay. So they start putting everything together. Well, I come home, by the time it's too late. So I get up the next day, and I finish my phone calls up, get everything trying to set up, and I need a physical. So I called the local doctor up here in town, just a little, not like a big hospital, just a little doctor, and asked him if he could give me this physical. And he said, yeah, stop by about 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock. Oh, God. Okay. So then I go down to the office, and they're trying to get my paperwork together. And they had to have 3, I can't remember if it was signatures or letters or whatever. But anyway, so Steve, Dan, and Jerry signed off on, the letters and whatever for me to get my license. And I get all my paperwork together. I come back home. I go up there at 4 o'clock. I take a physical. And that night, I'm on the road to Memphis. Mm-hmm. And I went down there, and I went to class Thursday, Friday, realized I didn't have a CPR first aid. So Saturday, I drive around and I finally find a Red Cross Center in West Memphis, Arkansas, that'll give a first aid CPR class on Saturday. I'm not going to tell you all about Saturday night, but I relieved my stress Saturday night in downtown Memphis. Came in Monday, and I started testing on Monday afternoon and Monday, Tuesday. I had all my tests in, and I got my operators of a towing vessel on the Western Rivers, and my master's baits license Monday and Tuesday, and came home. So I literally sat in class Thursday, Friday, and then Monday, Tuesday. Came home Tuesday night. I went down Wednesday morning and I threw my license on my port captain's desk.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me and he goes, I can't do nothing right now. And I mean, this was like just a few days after we talked, So finally, I basically convinced him. I said, we just brought back, we'd started our fleet there in Paducah, and we'd brought a boat down from the Gulf up here that didn't really have much of a crew. And he told me, he said, you go down there, and he said, you talk to that captain, he said, and you ask that captain if he'll teach you. And he said, you go get on that boat. And he said, you don't get off until you're a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay. And so I went down there. He said, they need a mate. So I went down there. When I got down there, I got talking to the mate who was from down south, Mobile, I think, and or Texas. And he said, man, he said, this is perfect. He said, I'm going through a divorce. And he said, I need to be home. He said, I got to make these court dates and all this stuff. And he said, if you'll just cover for me, he said, I'll let you. So we all worked it out. So I'm down there staring every chance I get. And then when my days off come up, I don't get off the boat.
Right.
I just sleep on the floor. And back then there wasn't a problem with that. I didn't get paid, but I mean, I stayed on the boat, and I slept on the floor in the captain's room, and I steered. And I got my license July 27th. I got on that boat, I think it was the 29th. September 16th, they called and told me to get off the boat. I thought, well, crap, that's done. Okay, that's over. And I wasn't a pilot. I mean, I had just, however much time you can squeeze in steering like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I get home. I think it was the 16th, 15th or 16th. Next thing I know, I'm getting a phone call. They're getting no cell phones. This was 1995, and I get a phone call, and a man says, I need a. This was from another company of ours. Back then, we had different companies within, and he said, I need a pilot. I said, you called the wrong number. And he said, no. He said, I heard you've been doing some steering. You're doing good. He said, I need a pilot. And I'm like, oh, no. I said, when do you need me? And he said, Monday. And this was like Friday. And I said, no. I said, I'm not going to work for somebody I ain't ever met. And I said, I got long hair. And I said, you just might not like the way I look. And so here I am, 24 years old, just got my license, virtually no what you call steering time. And so we talk about it, and he convinces me. I go down on Monday, and I go to Nashville, and I sit and talk to him, and he convinced me to give it a try. So I drive back up on Tuesday. I'm on a tug, mm-hmm. And I was always a line boat guy. The only tug experience I had was that from the time I got my license to the time this happened. So late July, I was going to say the 1st of August to the 1st of September. Well, it was quite an experience. I got on there, and they worked one pilot and one deckhand on each ship. And all you had to do was put one load from the fleet, or from the dredge to the fleet, and one empty from the fleet to the dredge. Mm-hmm. And when I got on the boat, they gave me a deckhand, but the only experience he had on the water was he was the son of one of the men that worked on the dredge. And that summer, when he got out of high school, they hired him to paint the dredge. And they put him on the boat. And so it was me, who had no experience driving a boat hardly, and him, who had no experience decking.
Right.
And I didn't even know how to slide a barge. I mean, I knew basically how to drive. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like just, and I'm just not blind running around out there. I mean, I'd had enough to know how to steer the boat, but how to walk the boat efficiently, to spot the anchors, all that. I had to learn that on the fly.
Right.
And the guys on the dredge taught me a lot. They sit up there and watch these boats forever, so they kind of knew what's going on. And then I learned, when I went there, they had cell phones in the wheelhouse, the old big bag phones,
Hmm.
Cell phones weren't real portable then, but they were a new technology. Well, I guarantee you, Ingram might not have paid for my education with the steersman program, but they paid for my education through phone bills because I called everybody. And I learned real quick how to learn without being shown. I learned real quick how to learn by listening.
Hmm.
And I'd call, hey, and this was all the way through my career. I'd call and say, hey, I'm here and I want to take this many barges and the river's doing this and the water's doing this. Can I do it? Well, the boat can. Okay, that's good enough. You know, hey, I'm going here. How do I do? And I learned, which I think is a very good way to learn. I take nothing away from the steers and programs that we have today. They're far superior in any way to what I'm talking about learning. And you find a lot of guys back. I hate to say it back in the day, but that learned like I'm learning. I wasn't there. But I was on that dredge and I had one, put one empty on and one load off. Um, a lot of learning there, a lot of learning because you learn it yourself and you learn from messing up and you learn the hard way,
Yeah.
and it was rough and it was stressful. But then they moved you from the dredge. I went to Nashville and I worked up there. Same thing. One load from the fleet to the dock and one empty from the dock to the fleet.
Hmm.
Well, they'd bring two or three sometimes. So I got to handle two or three. And there's a couple of narrow bridges up there where we used to have our sand yard. And then on that boat, at night, a lot of times you wouldn't do anything. You'd take 6 or 9 barges out and you'd go down below Nashville and turn one of the bigger line boats, split their toes up, bring them in. And then we ran up to a little place a few mile away with sand barges to take to their dock up there, up above Nashville. So I got a little bit of up and down the river under my belt.
Hmm.
And then I came back down to Paducah Fleet. And I worked in Paducah Fleet, was a little faster pace. And I made an impression on the captain there that wanted me to come over and work with him on what we called then the overage boat. And that was back when we ran a lot of bigger tows for TVA up the Tennessee River. So we'd run 25 out of there. Well, somebody had to take the other 10 and take them up through the lock. So here I am on this 1,000 horsepower boat, the C.A. Johnson, and I'm taking, these tows, these overage tows up the Tennessee River and up through Kentucky Lock. So that gave me my locking experience. So it was just incremental baby steps all the way up.
Right.
And then we'd run up to the quarries. Well, you get up there and you bring out what you can. Well, so you bring out 4 or 6 barges. Well, next time you go up there, you feel a little braver. You want to go from 4 to 6. Well, next time you want to go from 6 to 9, and so you experiment all the way and you gain your confidence. And that's just the way my career went all the way after that. I went from the fleets there. I got on the biggest boat of the fleet we had, and I made. I was on by that time I was on front watch, and then I went to the 1800s and I ran up in above Nashville up there in that little trade. Well, there again, when we wasn't running our 6-packs back and forth to Nashville, up above Nashville, we'd grab a 9 or a 12 barge tow and run down to Cheatham Lock and turn a boat down there.
Hmm.
And that give you a little, stretch your legs a little more. And then you'd have to come out, maybe get the boat worked on. So you'd grab 9 or on a good weather, 12 barges and come down to Paducah. So that gave you a little more line boat. Well, then they moved me up to a 4200, running the coal trade on to Cumberland City.
Hmm.
Short run, little retractable boat that nobody wanted to work on. So guess what? The new guy gets that right.
Right.
And we worked ourselves up where we were doing 20 and sometimes 25 on that run. And then we moved over to the Tennessee River and you do 25 or 30 over there. Well, then you get a little braver. And, one time, a couple times I did 35.
Hmm.
So it just stepped up, and it got up to where I never left the Ohio. I was offered to go to the Mississippi River. I thought about it and I turned them down on both accounts, both the upper and the lower. I was in my mid 30s and I was just comfortable where I was at. I really enjoyed what I was doing. I never felt the need to have to. When I was in my 20s, it was kind of funny. There's one of those twists of life, Tim. When I was in my mid 20s, I was begging to go to the Mississippi River and wanted to go on the lower. And my goal was always to take 30 through Baton Rouge Bridge by the time I was 30.
Okay.
Well, I turned 30 and I hadn't made it. I was still on the Ohio, Tennessee, Cumberland River. And by this time, they'd moved me on the Ohio. And they'd called me and we'd expanded again. And they'd asked me if I wanted to go on the upper or the lower. and they were really trying to encourage me to go to the lower. And at first, I almost accepted, and well, I did accept, and then I got thinking about it, and I just didn't have that desire anymore. I was liking what I was doing. Matter of fact, I kept trying to get off the Ohio back onto the Cumberland uh, River. And my favorite river was always the Cumberland River, and still is. It's a small river. You run full size tows. It's just fun. It's right here close to home. I know it well. And I got to the point, I guess, in my career where I get into my comfort zone, and I like doing what I was doing. I ran the Ohio River a lot. Was never a fan of the Ohio River. Ran the Tennessee River some. That's all right. But my favorite river to run was always that little Cumberland River. I liked it to this day. That's where I liked it. So I spent my whole career pretty well in the Tennessee Valley. Um, Probably should have expanded and kept expanding. It's never a good thing to get too comfortable or complacent in what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the smaller rivers. I enjoyed the smaller boats, and that's where I stayed pretty well my whole career until I came shoreside.
Where did along the way did the Turbo nickname come from?
That first boat at the dredge.
Okay.
It came from really annoying a lot of people. Remember, I'm 24 years old, wide open. This last 6-8 months, if you remember, was just a whirlwind.
Mm-hmm.
How it all just evolved and erupted into what it was. I was a second mate that was just trying to make mate. I just made mate, was working all I could in the engine room, thinking I was going to go that path. They talked to me about going in the engine room. I was setting my sights that way. My life gets whirled around when somebody asked me to go get my pilot's license. I did. I don't know who made the suggestion for that man to call me. I've accredited a couple of people, but I really couldn't say who done it. But the man called me. I took the chance. I got in the wheelhouse when I probably shouldn't have. And so I'm just excited. You could imagine that kind of a whirlwind at 24 years old. And now they give you a boat to play with. But I was always from the big boats. And this is where the story comes in about my name. I'd sit up there, and man, every time I'd hear one of them big boats kick out of the fleet and go by, if you've ever been close to one, you know what I'm talking about. You hear that whistle when those turbos come up.
Mm-hmm.
And I just always tell them, I always, wrongfully so, now that I've went through the full cycle and have drove just about, a lot of stuff, I can tell you that there's probably nobody got a harder job than a harbor pilot.
Yeah.
And the things they can do with those boats, and the size tows I've taken with those little boats, I wouldn't do it again today. But I wasn't happy there. I wasn't a little boat guy, and I wanted on those big boats so bad. And I'd always talk about them. And one guy made the comment there at the dredge to one of the other boats. Well, I don't know, but I wish he'd quit talking about those. He said, about those damn turbos. He said, if I hear about those one more time, and one of them said, hell, turbocharged, he's got turbocharged chops.
Yeah.
And so it kind of stuck. They started joking with me about turbocharged chops. I talked real fast. I talked a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always talking about the same thing, which is getting out of these little boats and getting on the big boat.
Right.
And so over the time, it stuck. And then it just got dropped down to turbo. And to the point to where after probably a year or two, that was just a given. Nobody even remember where it came from. It's like any other nickname. It usually starts out of an exaggerated character behavior.
Sure.
And sticks. And within a few years, my mail was even coming to the house turbo. So, if my mail comes from work, most of the time it has turbo on
it.
Yeah. When I came shoreside, they put me down as Mike Hughes, and they had to go in and figure out a way to put another name in there and put it as turbo because everybody was complaining. Nobody knew how to send me an email because nobody knew my name.
Right.
They type in turbo and nothing would come in the email.
Yeah. Who the hell is Mike Hughes?
Right. Yeah. No, I am not identifiable. If I want any kind of anonymity in an industry function or something, then I put Mike Hughes on my name tag. Sure. If I want everybody to know me, I put turbo.
Sure. Well, when along the way did you meet your wife? Tell me that story.
Oh, It was that first year on the river. So I went to work on the river in June. And I had a little time adjusting to that. It's weird. And I think there's probably a lot of people that work on the river that will resonate with this one. Here I am, 18 years old, and everything when you're a kid in high school is your social circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I come from a small community. There's nothing here. So everybody that went to work, or they went to college, or they moved away and went to work. So the few of us that were left all had jobs. Most of them, most of them moved away for a job, bigger cities and towns. Um, a lot of them were on the job in the rock quarries, sawmills, some of them on the towboats, a lot of them on towboats. So I came home and there was nothing to do. So at that time, I decided there was a truck I always wanted, and I decided to build it. And I went out and found me one. And a buddy of my father's that worked with him at the prison was a body man by trade. And so he did body work out of his house. And Dad talked to Jim, and so I took the old truck up there. We stripped it off, took the cab and the bed off, stripped it under its frame, and I completely restored the frame and started restoring the truck. And I'm doing this on my days off, my 30 days off. And I did that all summer there, that first summer. And because my dad was trying to discourage me from taking a car payment, I went and looked at an 89, brand new 89 Mustang GT. And I was really enjoying that. And I thought, man, I was figuring it up. I could afford it. And then due to my colorful driving history as a teenager, my insurance is going to be $11 a month more than my car payment. So that nixed the hot rod out of my equation. So I decided I'd build me one.
Yeah.
And so I was building this 67 Ford pickup into a street rod. I love that body style, still do. And I found a good one. And old farmer had it. Remember back then these cars weren't 20 years old.
Right.
And so I got it up there and we're working on it. And down just right beside that guy that was helping me restore the car was this high school kid. And he'd get off the bus every day and he'd go climb on. He'd ride his three-wheeler back and forth. And he got to coming over there and we got talking. And he was 3 years younger than me. He was like a sophomore in high school. But you got to remember, I'm just a few months out of high school. So wasn't that much of an age difference. And he hadn't even had his driver's license yet. Well, in the process, he helped me build this truck. And we'd hang out together. And, he still hung out with the kids, right? He still hung out with the high school kids. So, I'm the guy first year out of high school, first summer, and I'm still hanging out with the high school kids. And it was the one town up the road up here, about 15 mile away. And they had this little pool hall, arcade, pizza, video rental place that all the kids hung out in at night. So I'd go hang out there. He kept telling me about this aunt. And so no, you gotta. And Judy had been in Albuquerque after she got out of school with her brother, and she was thinking about moving out west. She's got a big family, 7 brothers and sisters, and she's the baby of the bunch. And she'd been out there living with her brother and his wife, and she thought she might want to stay out there. So he told me, he said, this was like November now, and Jeff had told me, he said, Mike, he said, she's coming in for Thanksgiving. He said, you need to meet her. And I'm like, no, I do not want to meet this girl.
Yeah.
And so we're there one evening, we're playing pool. My truck's just about done. And I'm driving it. It ain't completely finished, but I'm driving it, putting the interior in it. And this little old blonde-haired girl walks in, and she's 5'2", 90 pounds, and just a beautiful face. And it's I still look back, she was definitely, above my pay grade, so to speak. And I looked over at her and I seen her, and Jeff was overdoing what he was doing or whatever. And I whistled at him and I threw my pool stick down. And all she did was walk through the door, picked up a movie and a pizza and walked back out.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, what's up? What's up? And I said, come on, we're going. He said, where are we going? And I said, I don't know who that is, but I said, I'm going to marry that girl. And he started laughing. And he said, okay. So we get in the truck and we go, follow her. And before she goes home, she stopped by the little, how everybody used to, back then, before modern social media, everybody hung out on the street corner someplace. Mm-hmm. And so there was a little area up there by the car wash in that little town where all the kids, especially all the hot rodders, hung out with their cars, and there's somebody to get a drag race going for the night and all that kind of stuff. And they'd sit around the hood of the cars. It was kind of in a dark gravel parking lot behind everything, off to the side. And there would always be somebody there sneaking beer out of the bed of the truck, and watching for the town marshal drive by, that small town stuff.
Mhm.
Well, she parks there, talking to one of her friends. Well, I asked Jeff. I said, "You know these people?" Jeff said, "Yeah, I know them all." Okay, so we pull in there. I said, "You go talk to somebody." So we walk up there, and I kind of inject myself into Judy's conversation with her friend, and I vaguely knew the people she was talking to. And by her admittance, the first thought she had of me was I was the most annoying, arrogant son of a bitch she'd ever met in her life.
Yeah, good start.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so anyway, she went home, and that's all I had on my mind. And as luck would have it, she'd had some trouble with an ex-boyfriend of hers, kind of making a nuisance of himself. Small town, young kid drama. And her parents just didn't really like the fact of her going out. He was harassing her a lot. So her dad had told her, "Look, if you're going to go downtown and hang out with that bunch, you need to make sure you got Jeff or somebody with you. Because Jeff was her nephew. This guy I was hanging out with, by the way, was her nephew, her sister's oldest son. So now her sister's like, like I said, my wife was the baby of 7.
Mm-hmm.
But her next closest sibling was her brother, who was 8 years older.
Hmm.
So when she was born, her oldest brother was like 21 years old.
Right.
And so her sister, my wife grew up with a lot of her nieces and nephews as being the same age as her.
Right.
Close.
Right.
So that catches you up on why, Jeff's involved and how that started out.
Sure.
And so Jeff, well, if me and Jeff were developing a real tight friendship, still are to this day. And if he's got a chaperone duty, well, hell, that means me too, right? And so here she's stuck with this guy that she can't stand. And the only way her dad's going to let her go out and hang out with her friends is if Jeff's with her. Well, at that time, me and Jeff were a package deal.
Yeah.
So we just kind of created an attraction just of being together. And then, of course, Jeff didn't want to chaperone his aunt. He didn't understand why. As an adult now, I look back and I understand Bob's concern, which is probably overprotective as a father, but probably warranted some too.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, I got closer and closer to Judy's family, especially her older sister, who was Jeff's mother. And so it got to be she could go out not only if she went out with Jeff, but if she went out with Mike. Well, come to find out years down the road, the reason that was thrown in there was because Judy's older sister, Debbie, and her mother fell in love with me before she did. So the reason
always good to start at the top.
The reason that her being chaperoned was extended so long, which by the way just really, drove her nuts, was because her sister and mother were behind the scenes conspiring on how they could get her to date me. And it all started one night. I was with her, and we went and sat behind the bank across from that little pizza place, and we just sat there in the truck and talked.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just me and her. There wasn't nobody else around. And I was so frustrated at that point, I wasn't trying to impress her. And she seen a little bit different side of me. She got to actually see me just talk. Mm-hmm. And, talk about, for kids. Remember, we're 19 years old, right? So we're not talking gosh damn we're not on the Rhodes Scholar level of communications. Sure. We're not solving world problems. We're still in the who's cheating on who at school type conversation. Right. And but we had one of those meaningful deep conversations, and then we just started spending more and more time together. And of course, I'm going back and forth to the boat, and we had never officially formally went out on a date. And at one point there, I gave up on her. I actually told her sister, I said, "I'm done," and I just quit going up there. I just quit. And I figured, I'm almost 20 years old now. I'm not gonna. I've been messing with this for almost a year or whatever, or several months. I'm not gonna, spend my life pining away over a girl, right? So I'm gonna get out there. And her sister called me up one day, and Judy had to go do something, had to get a dress or something for some event. And she told me, she said, "Do you still want to go out with her?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to, Debbie, but I'm not gonna do it. I mean, I'm not gonna chase her. I'm done with that." And she said, "If you want to be with her, then you need to get your ass up here," and told me what time. And I thought about it, so I showed up. Well, they had it all planned to where everybody in the family could have took Judy somewhere. Judy didn't have a car at that time. She had to use the family car or somebody's car. And yeah, that's another thing from way back in the good old days was you didn't always just get guaranteed a car at 16 years old. You know what I mean? And
Right.
uh, so I go up there and get her, and I take her up there. We're spending that time together, and I just told her that I was done. I wasn't going to chase her. And I told her, I can't remember how the exact conversation went, but I told her something to the extent, of course, there again, this is young kid dramatics, right? But I told her, I said, one of these days you're going to regret this, because I said, one of these days you're going to fall for me. And when you do, you're going to fall hard. And basically, the whole point of the story was I may or may not be
Yeah.
here. and so that right there is what triggered us actually starting to date. And we had not really been all that physical with each other before I asked her to marry me. It didn't take long. We'd been together for, this is like going on a year, and in teenage terms, this is like a lifetime.
Right.
And we're sitting there one night and goofing off, and we never dated. I would just every day go pick her up, and we'd go sit down in front of the river. And there again, that's where the river ties into my life. That little town was on the river, and we'd go down to the park, and we'd sit there, and we'd hang out at that little arcade till it closed down, and we'd go up to the convenience store before it'd close. We'd load up on soda pops and snacks, and we'd go sit there, and we would sit in front of that river and watch the moon rise and talk until the birds start chirping. And then I'd drop her off about dawn, and she'd get in trouble for being out all night, and I'd get in trouble for being out all night. That's actually what got me um, well on my way to being kicked out of the house after I quit the boat. That is what got me kicked out of the house.
Yeah.
My dad told me, he said, if you ain't gonna listen, if you ain't gonna follow my rules and be here when I tell you to be here, he said, you can just go on. So I did. And that's a whole other story. But that's how and we were just sitting there one night, and we were talking. There was something funny that happened. I got off the boat and I came home. And this was the trip before I quit. I came through town and everybody stopped me. I mean, small town there, but I had just one after the other stopping me. Judy's cheating on you. I'm like, how's she cheating on me? We ain't dating. Can't cheat on somebody you ain't dating. And they're like, oh, no, she's cheating on you. She was with this guy. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, so first thing I did, went like I always do. I'd already talked to her. I went and picked her up. Right. And I said, everybody, and I told her what had happened. And she said, oh my God. She said, I went out with him, I went out with him one time. She said, we met down here, and she said, we hung out in town a couple of times. She said, no, she said, I am not, I'm not dating that guy. And I said, well, that's fine. I don't care if you do. And I said, I don't own you or nothing. We're talking like that. And so through the night, we just kept laughing about how, and she was like, and who told you? And I was telling her all the people. And I said, no, they literally flagged me over and pulled me over, and she's like, oh my God. And we're just laughing about small town stuff. And at one point there, I told her, I said, if they all think that, and now remember, every day I picked her up, we spent every day and every evening together. And I told her, I said, we ought to just give them something to talk about. She said, yeah. And so we got talking about it, and we decided we'd date. And I actually, more or less, to wrap up a long story short, the way that it all transpired was we were engaged to be married before we were really dating. And we've been together ever since. 30, oh shoot, who was it? We got married in October of 90. So that's how quick this all happened. You had, I went to work in June of 89 on the boat, and I met her that Thanksgiving. And then like the next May, all this went down, April and May. And then after all that went down and we'd actually officially started dating, quote, engaged to be married, I went out on a boat in July, late June, July. And that's when I that's in that August is when I jumped boat and came home.
Yeah.
And so I bummed around that fall, and the next spring went back on the boat. And it's funny because we got married in October of '90, and uh, struggled that first year, and the very next year, that fall of the next year is when my wife, she got really sick. She kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and she ended up in the hospital. They diagnosed her with chronic Crohn's disease, which she still has to this day, and she had her first surgery. So just a little over a year after we got married, we were faced with a chronic life-threatening illness
Right.
that's still been with us to this day. So, 1990 to 22, so 32 years this October.
Yeah.
Waited 10 years to have a kid, 9 years. So we didn't have a kid till we were 29. So made a pretty good run of it, and it's been rough, but that's just the way my whole life's been.
Yeah.
I mean, everything about it, I've always just jumped in and figured it out after there was no master plan, Jim. Everything was just I've never asked for nothing. I've never asked for a promotion. I've never asked for a pay raise. I people have always, you know, but I use that as a learning tool when I'm talking to deckhands and people and stuff all the time now that I've got a few gray hairs, and you get to that point in your life where you spend your whole life jumping up and down like you got springs in your feet, asking people to pay attention to you. Nobody does. And then you get to a certain point where people come to you, and you get that, you get enough gray hair in your beard, you get some sagely advice. But I tell them all, I, and nowadays, we see so much in the industry and in the world now. Nobody's satisfied. They want to move up. Everybody wants and expects, and we got to have career paths.
Right.
And I've always told everybody, one of the things, my dad was full of isms. One of the things I did, I just repeated the other day. I said, I had something going on, and I told him, I said, my dad is smiling in his grave right now. I had a problem, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and I was madder than hell and chewing everybody's out. And I turned around and I realized I had a meeting about it, trying to get to the bottom of it. And I told them all. I stopped the meeting. I said, "Well, I see the problem." I said, "I see the problem right here." I said, "My father's smiling from his grave," because I said, "My dad used to always tell me, son, when everybody in the world's wrong, look in the mirror."
Yeah.
Because not everybody's wrong.
Right.
If everybody's wrong, you probably got your viewpoint probably falls. Mm-hmm. And he always told me, he said, "Son," he said, "be loyal, stay at one place,
mm-hmm.
work hard." And he said, "Work at being the best you can be." And he said, "Money will come." He said, "Don't ever chase money." And this was somebody that every decision my dad ever made was driven by the dollar.
Right.
He valued. I never remember ever having a conversation. I'd be on the boat and I call my dad up. "Oh, what's going on today, Dad?" "Oh, he had this campground around there." "Oh, well, it was a good day today. Three people paid their lease, and so and so donated money to patch the roads. Or Dad, how's it going today?" "It was a terrible day. I can't, man. I've been trying to find so and so to get his money out of his lease." I'm like, can we ever start the conversation with, "Boy, I just had a good time."
Right.
But it was funny. He lived that way, but he always preached to me, "Don't chase money, chase perfection." Now, my dad was a big perfectionist, and you could never satisfy or please him because he was always critical.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about it, Pop? Pretty good, but if you look right over here now, you see that right there. Gosh darn, man, why don't you just say good job and move on? And but he always strived for that perfection. That's what he always told me. He said, if you work harder than anybody else and work at being the best at what you do, he said, it don't matter if you dig ditches. He said, someday somebody's going to need the perfect ditch dug, and they're going to come to you, and you're going to be able to manage your price for digging that ditch.
Yep.
And I think that's a lesson that we could all learn from, and that's the way my life's been. I've never set out to plan to be anything or do anything. Matter of fact, most of the time, whatever I planned for, I ended up going 90 degrees in the other direction.
Right.
And I know I'm not any smarter than anybody else. I guarantee you that. And I'm definitely not any better than anybody else. And I can promise you, my looks never got me anywhere. But one thing I've always said, and I'll say it to this day, and I'm a lot older and I'm a lot fatter, and I can't physically keep going. But I'll tell you this: There's nobody that can outwork. And that's all I've ever strived to do is work hard and be the best at what I'm doing at the moment.
Sure.
You know, I never got wrapped up in starry eyed doing one job, but thinking about or wishing about another.
Right.
And I think when you do that, sometimes I'm not saying it ain't bad. I didn't have a plan. But I've just seen so many times when what I had planned never ended up. And I was so gear set for that it was a whirlwind throwing me over here. But, at the core of it, I was always focused on being the best. I was always focused at I was very competitive, and I still am.
Sure.
And anything I do, I want to do it better than anybody else.
Right.
And I know that's probably a character. There's a lot of people argue it's a character flaw, and I'm probably one of them. But I think that gives you the drive to do what you do the best you do.
Right.
And I think that gets recognition. Not always as soon as it should, but I can point back to every one of them folks in my road, Tim. And at some point, my hard work, not my success, and not the perfection that I was striving for, but just the hard work, impressed somebody that flipped that switch and sent my train down the next track.
Right.
And I think that's all you can hope for in life is, I've always told everybody, I always tell everybody that, my wife, God bless her, is the type of person that if she was standing in the room and Satan appeared with a pitchfork in his hand, he'd drop the pitchfork and fall in love with her.
Yeah.
She's just one of them people that she fills a social setting. People gravitate toward her and everybody loves her. And she's a beautiful person inside out. And me, at the point, at the risk of sounding a little too colorful on your radio show, I'm like cheap beer. I'm an acquired taste.
Right.
You take the first drink out of the first beer and you kind of shiver and you want to spit it out.
Yeah.
But after about 3 or 4 of them, that ain't too bad.
Yeah.
And so I'm the type of person people are going to warm up to. and sure. So it's not I'm not one of them personalities that just screams success. But I've always managed to do all right.
Sure.
And the only thing when I look back at all those forks in the road and all those dark places where I was frustrated, and I think what made those dark places, Tim, is, and I'm not saying you don't have to have focus now. Now, don't take that wrong. You got to be focused, and you got to be driven, and you got to have a plan. I was a big planner. My father taught me, and me and my wife have always lived by a 5-year plan. Where do we want to be in 5 years? But I've learned real quick that I never included, and this was something mostly taught to me by my father, I never included where I personally wanted to be in a career or a path. I focused on where I wanted my life to be monetarily. Okay, we want to get this done to the house.
Right.
I never worried about making enough salary to do that to the house. I worried about accomplishing that goal. If I had to work harder, I didn't work at getting a pay raise to make more money to remodel the house. I worked at remodeling the house. And if that meant my first remodel, I was a young man and I wanted to remodel. It was a big whole controversy there. Because remember, this was my dad's parents' house that they built by their hands. And I wanted to change it. Well, I didn't sit well with my father. He thought it ought to be a shrine.
Right.
Well, it was a whole big conversation, but finally we're in there arguing about it one day, and we're at the local restaurant here where everybody hangs out. We call it the coffee shop. And finally, Dad just told me, he said, well, if you want to do it, he said, I'm tired of talking about it. He said, just do it. And I said, Dad, I don't have any money. And he said, yeah, you do. He said, get your ass out there on the boat. And he said, don't come back till I tell you to. So the first remodel we did, I helped a little bit here and there when I was home, but mainly my dad did it because my job was to go out there on the boat and make the money.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived on the boat the whole time he's back here remodeling this house. Well, then a little bit later, 10 years later, we had my kid and we needed to remodel just a little bit. And we added on. Well, I did that one. Me and my father. And we did it together. And by that time, I was in the wheelhouse, so I made decent money and I didn't, work a lot. So I did it more myself. And this last one, my father's been passed away. So I did this whole remodel, this whole revamp, regut of the house by myself. But in other words, my 5-year plans, everybody talks about this remodel I'm doing now. I've been 2 years into it. And they're like, man, I wouldn't live that way. Why are you doing that? Why didn't you just hire it done? Because I set my life up in 5-year blocks. Where do I want to be? But the focus that I put on those, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I don't put focus on how I'm going to make the money to pay for it. I just work hard enough, whether I got to do the work myself or go out and work. So the point is, this remodel here, I did the remodel all myself, and I didn't work any extra to make the money to make the remodel. The first one, though, I didn't have the know-how or the ability. My father did. So I went out and I worked continuously, literally continuously on the boat and just sent the money home for him to do it. But I didn't say, oh, well, I want to get a pay raise and be a mate. And then when I get a mate, I'm going to go borrow the money to do the house. I just went and made the money to do the house. And because I worked that hard, I got recognition and I moved up. That's where this remodel for this house the first time, and now that I put it all together, is actually what accelerated me through lead man and mate. Because I was always on the boat. I was the go-to guy for the crew dispatch. I bumped into every captain under the sun. Well, it don't take long. You bump into a captain that says, the way I made lead man was I ran into a captain that needed a lead man and liked the way I worked.
Right.
So he called up and he said, hey, I want this guy as my lead man. Next thing you know, I'm a lead man on the boat.
Right.
Well, then that man, he got off, and another captain got on and impressed me. And he literally, right there in front of me, picked up the phone, called the office, and said, this man needs to be a mate. So boom, I'm a second mate. You see where I'm going there? I never planned any of that. I never set out to be that. I always wanted to. I always wanted to be a mate. I knew I wanted to be something. Well, then here I am. I knew I wanted to get off deck. I got a neighbor that's, a port engineer. He stops by and starts talking to me about port engineering. I said, okay, well, I'm going to pick you up and bring you to work. So I quit riding over on the boats, but I'm still working every day because I get off the boat and the very next day, he's out here in the yard at 4 o'clock in the morning honking the horn. And I go down there and work with him 12 hours a day. And I never thought about being an engineer. That's just what was next.
Right.
And that's where I was heading. And then lo and behold, a conversation on the steps. Somebody convinced me it made sense to go get my license. I go get my license. I come back. Next thing you know, he throws me on a boat, tells me don't get off there until you're a pilot.
Yep.
Somewhere along those rounds, somebody meets somebody, says, hey, you need a pilot? I got a guy that's really working his ass off. And I've always had focus and plans in my life, but never that detailed. And I think sometimes we put too much detail on and we get so blinded in the path that we pick, we miss the opportunities around us.
Right.
When sometimes if you just lose, it's kind of like, you remember, and I'm the world's worst storyteller, Tim. I'll chase a squirrel around a tree 10 times before I watch to see what's holding with it. You remember those 3D pictures that everybody went through a few years ago, and you stare at them, and all of a sudden, if you stared long enough, you see a picture?
Yep.
Well, a lot of people couldn't see that picture, but a lot of people focused. The only way you seen those pictures was to relax your eyes and quit focusing.
Right.
And I think sometimes we focus so hard we forget to see the picture. Whereas if we just focus on our work and being the best we can be and working harder than anybody else,
Yeah.
somebody will recognize you. And it might not be in the direction you want to go. But the other big, I think, key to my success, what little bit of modest success I've had, is I've never said no.
Right.
I can't remember one time when I've told somebody I wouldn't do something.
Right.
And so the two things the two pieces of advice I can give is I never asked for anything and I never said no to nothing was offered.
Mm-hmm.
I just accepted and tried to do the best job. And trust me, because of that, I've really got some crappy gigs.
Yeah.
Because for a long time, I was kind of labeled as the guy that would do anything nobody else wanted to do.
Right.
But there's a lot of advantage to being that guy that'll do anything nobody else wants to do. Because think about it. If you're trying to get something done and you can't find anybody to do it, how valuable is the guy that'll do it for you?
Right.
So I think that kind of mentality of focus on what you're doing at the moment and make sure you're the best at the time.
Right.
Hold a high level of competitiveness for yourself and everybody around you without too much arrogance. Never ask for anything and never say no to anything that's offered.
Sure.
and I think you'll get pretty far.
I think that concludes the bulk of this conversation there, man. But before we go, tell me about a trip down the Cumberland.
Just in general, what it's like.
Just, yeah, paint a picture for me.
A trip down the Cumberland River. Um, Cumberland River, if anybody don't know, is a little narrow river. It's full of it's an old river carved out of the Appalachian Mountains, right between where the Appalachians and the Smokies. I don't know where you divide on which one's which, but it comes out of eastern Kentucky, circles down through Tennessee and doubles back up into Kentucky and comes out right there, right above Paducah, Kentucky, right above the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi. It empties into the Ohio River. It's a deep gorge river cut out of the mountains. Back in the day, that river was either a puddle of rocks you could walk through, or a raging torrent that swept everything in its path away when the rain had come out of the mountains. Yeah. Much like any river you see out west, it's just a mountainous river. Mm-hmm. And during the TVA project, that was a Roosevelt project through the Depression era. They took the Tennessee Cumberland, which were very similar rivers. The Tennessee was bigger. They both originate in close to the same place and follow the same general path, and actually come back into the Ohio River within 10 miles of each other. Mm-hmm. Those two rivers, they dammed up into huge lakes, huge reservoirs, and they did it as they're some of the only true flood control rivers here in our Mississippi River system. There's others, but I mean, those were the big first grandiose experiments with the huge locks. So you make these lakes. So it's a very dynamic river as far as it's rocky when it's a river, and when it's a lake, it looks like it's this huge expanse and it's very deep. But you get the original river in amongst these shallow flats that are flooded. So you might look like you got 5 miles from bank to bank, and yet you're going up the original river channel, and 10 feet away from your boat's one of these long-legged birds standing there looking at you. So when you're in the lakes, you really got to follow the buoy line. When you're in the river, there's shallow spots where it's shoaling and stuff, and then there's rock basically on the banks. So it's a pretty stable river as far as the way it moves. It's got its unique purposes, but due to those locks, purposes, it's got its unique attributes, mm-hmm. Or characteristics, maybe you can say. It's funny, it'll run, and then when they shut the locks off, those locks all generate electricity. They're all turbines. So at night, when they don't need electricity, they shut them off. You get a bathtub effect. If they shut them off from the bottom to the top, all the water continues to run down, hits the lock below it, and bounces back. So right. early in the morning, it ain't nothing to be northbound and go to stop and realize you're southbound. Mm-hmm. So you really got to watch the stuff moving on the river, and watch when you go by fleets or something that's floating, which way is it floating, so you'll know which direction you're pointing, if that makes sense. So if you're coming down the Cumberland River, we always left Nashville. Okay, there's a spot, there's a small navigable area above Nashville that we run to a power plant, and that's 6 barges pretty well max. I mean, we brought out some more, and it's very tight. But when you come out, we run 12 and 15 barge tows. We used to run 15 a lot. You're talking a 300-foot wide river, very crooked. And I told a guy that started riding with me up there. We were up there first trip out, and he had one guy ride with him one time. And so we get up there, and he's by himself. This is his first trip out by himself. And we're up there at Nashville building tow. And I told him, I said, no, Russell, here's what you're going to see when you leave here, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, look, I like about 10 mile an hour. And he looked at me and said, I ain't making no damn 10 mile an hour out of this river. And I said, oh, okay. I mean, run the way you want. I'm not going to tell you how to run, but I'm just telling you, about 10 mile an hour, hold up on the points, watch your stern, and then, that gives you enough throttle left to shove out when you get out the lower end. And so I go to bed. First thing I hear, West Nashville Bend, he's missing it. Comes down below Haley's, he makes the steer, and he misses it. Well, when I come up the next morning, relieve him 5 o'clock, he looked at me and he goes, 10 mile an hour is pretty good speed to come out here. I said, yeah, it is. If you go too slow, if you go too slow, you'll outrun your steer, I guess, or it just don't, it won't stick. If you go too fast, you really got to play a slide, and you can drive out all the way and go real fast, but you really got to be on your game. But it's one of them rivers that a good moderate speed where you leave yourself plenty of room to push out because it's so narrow. You're 1,000 feet long and a 300-foot wide river with switchback turns. So you got Cheatham Lock be your first. When you come out of Nashville, you got some interesting scenery. It's beautiful river. It is a beautiful river. You're in the gorges and the mountains, and you're coming out. And you're always in the hills there. And then you got the big lakes, Kentucky Lake, Barkley Lake. Kentucky Lake's on the Tennessee River side, Barkley Lake's on the Cumberland River side. Those two rivers are connected, by the way, by a canal through the lakes. So it's 184 miles. Leave Nashville. You come down and Cheatham Lock will be next. You come down through Clarksville. There's a small railroad bridge there, very historic railroad bridge. It was actually there during the Civil War, 120 foot wide ish. So some people like to flank that, and there's some people double trip it. You get up there and run up there long enough, and you'll just steer through it. You come on down. You got Cumberland City Power Plant. Years ago, I don't think it is now, but years ago that was when it was built like one of the largest power plants east of the Mississippi River. They'll burn a 15 barge tow of coal daily. That's without putting any on the ground. So big power plant there. Nothing else until you get down. That's where about Dover, Tennessee, is about where the river starts widening out into some marshy lands, and you got some protected wildlife areas. And then down around Canton Bridge, it opens up into a lake, and you'll be in Barkley Lake until you get to Barkley Lock. You make Barkley Lock, and from Barkley Lock down to Paducah, that's still old school river. It's mud and sandbars with piles of rock, very, very narrow. And you got a lot of rock quarries down through there you got to dodge. So it's just a twisty, turny, crooked little river, but it's fun to drive. To me, it's like playing the ultimate video game as far as like a race car or a Mario Kart or something like that. It's that small and close, and you're steering that much, and you run empty south and loads north. So, it's like I said, you'll go from making 6, 7, 8 mile an hour northbound with 15 loads through the lake, dead water, no current. You got to watch your slide. You slide out of everything, and then by the time you get to the lock, you're in a river 250 foot wide, and the lock's turning on water, and you're making a mile and a half an hour and struggling to stay off the points.
Right.
So you see a little bit of everything on that river, and it's so close quarters. The bad problem that I see with that river is if you don't watch it, you get a habit of wanting to hook the points too much, because when you come off of that river, you really don't, to do that river right, you don't hook the points. You think you do because you're so close to everything. You still run the gut of a bend just like you do in a big river. The only thing is you don't have that much river. So when you got a 300-foot river, you take a 100-foot wide toe out of it, you really don't see that you're off or on a point so much.
Right.
When you get on the bigger rivers, a lot of those guys come off that smaller river, and I'm guilty of it if I don't watch it. You get claustrophobia in rivers. You're scared of all the water. You want to be close to something.
Yeah.
And so you really get nervous being down in the gut of a bend, because you want to be up there on that point because you're used to looking at a point 20 to 50 foot away.
Right.
It's different. It really is. It's different. But I'll tell you this, and I'll defend this to anybody, and you're gonna have 1,000 comments after this. Somebody argue with me, but I can't speak for the Mississippi because I turned down my opportunity to go over there and run the lower. But I can tell you this: I've been an operations manager now for 7 years, and I have sent several people straight from that Cumberland River to the lower on 30 and 40 barge tows. And they've all made it.
Yeah.
I think if you can run those little dynamic rivers like the Cumberland River, the 10-Tom Black Warrior, the Intercoastal Canal, the Illinois River, If you can run those small dynamic rivers, I think you can run anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
There's some adjustments got to be made. You got to get used to the weight and the size. You got to get used to staying deep in the bend. There's some differences, but the fundamentals of driving a boat. And the second thing you got to remember is there's no tugs up there to help. Every fleet you stop at, you do your own tow work.
Right.
So you get boat handling. They're a good training ground, a good proving ground. And I think the smaller rivers are way underestimated and way underappreciated for the work those boys do for what they get done up there. I mean,
Okay.
the Monongahela, the Canoe River. I mean, we can go on and on. There's tons of the little rivers, but I think they're fun, they're dynamic, they're fast paced, and there again, it's one of them jobs nobody wants to do it. So when you take a job that nobody wants to do and you beg for it and do it better than anybody else, you're going to recognize.
Yeah. All right. Well, switch gears a little bit. Tell me about the transition to shoreside in your career since then.
Oh my God, it was the absolute hardest thing I've ever done.
Hardest thing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm listening.
It's that was the closest me and my wife ever came to a divorce.
Really?
Yes. What was it, 26, 27 years of being a towboater and being a towboater's wife. My wife was very involved with the boat and the crew. Every year she came and rode a week. Every year since we've been married, she came out and spent a week on the boat with me.
Okay.
She fell in love with the life. She fell in love with the guys. She was like their den mother for my crews.
Sure.
Guys be up there cleaning the wheelhouse in the morning. I'd call my wife up, put the phone on speaker, and we'd all sit there and talk. She would change recipes with the cooks.
Yeah.
Guys would blow out a pair of breeches, and she'd run and get them. She's chased towboats all up and down the eastern United States. She's made crew changes for me. One year it was too snowy to make a crew change. My relief had to get off. He had something. We were so disappointed. So I ignored her. I got my wife and fired up the truck, popped it in 4-wheel drive, and took off. And she dropped me off at the boat, picked him up, and took him home.
Yeah.
She's ran everywhere. And the guy, Christmas on the boat. Oh, anybody that's ever rode with me will tell you that I'm gonna be a little bit conceited here and say that Christmases on my boat were probably some of the best you ever have on the river. My wife seen
it. Okay.
Everybody got a present and stockings, and she made stockings for everybody. She made mittens. She didn't have stockings. She had these like mittens made, like work glove size mittens.
Okay.
And she'd fill them full of candy, and she'd bring candies to the boat. And it didn't matter where we were. She'd chase us down. She would find us. She got everybody's Christmas present there, got everybody's stocking there. So she was truly involved with being a towboater's wife. She loved it.
Yeah.
And when I came shoreside, talk about slamming the gears, I'm home every day. And me and her didn't communicate as well. You got to figure, we started out when we wrote letters to each other, and we'd write a letter a day. And she knew she knew how fast the boat moved, and she had a list of all the locks and their address and their phone number. And she would mail letters ahead of me, where every day I'd get it. Every lock I pulled up to, I had a letter. And then we gave into cell phones. And I was one of the first ones to get a cell phone. One of those old 1,500-minute roam anywhere talk America plans. My first cell phone was in '92 when you had to pay by the minute, 50 cents a minute or whatever it was. And so we communicated a lot. And then when cell phones got common, I just and when they came up with headsets, I just put her in my ear, and my boy, when it came time for supper at night, she'd put me on speakerphone and set me in the middle of the table, and I'd put my earphone in, and they were interrupted. Their dinner was interrupted by me calling traffic, and the radio's going off, and I got to sit there and be part of homework and dinner. So we had our own little system, and then all of a sudden we came home. I'm shoreside, and we're not communicating that well anymore. When I'm at work, I don't have time to talk to her. And then I had people to deal with. It wasn't just sitting out there in my little box where my sole focus is my crew and thinking about things to tell my wife. Or she didn't have easy access to me. She'd call, and I'd be in a meeting, so I'd ignore the call. I wouldn't get back to her for an hour later. And then I really disrupted her routine. She was used to being the head of the house and taking care of everything on her own. And now I'm here. And she never did the Donna Reed life. I mean, yes, my wife was always a stay-at-home mom, so my boy always got off the bus and had a stack waiting on him, and he did homework. And then when the homework was done, she had supper done because she cooked supper while she's helping with homework. And then he sat and ate a meal. And when I was here, I sat down and ate with him. Well, then I come home and remember, I just told you about how I did my job. I didn't go home when it was 5 o'clock. I went home when the work was done.
Right.
And so I'd be home at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock. She never knew. And I wasn't in the habit of like calling and telling her I'm gonna be here or there. I'd go. And I put so much focus on my job, I lost focus on her. And then she was used to really being involved. Well, shoreside, when you're doing an office job, there's not that much involvement for the wife. So now all of a sudden she's left out. And she, when I come home after being at work all day, I don't want to tell her what all I do. I don't want to recap today. I'm tired of it. I've done it. I just want to rest. And so she's expecting this big, and then she don't know all the people. So she felt kind of left out. The transition from vessel to shoreside, the hardest part of that, besides the family part, was for me. And I told you, I'm not the best of personalities. Being, I was a captain at 24 years old or 25. I was a pilot at 24. I was a captain at 25. And I was a captain ever since. I had a few stints here and there where I'd be on the back watch for one reason or another. I'd switch rivers or something. But for the most part, I was captain on the boat. And I got used to, and this is going to sound so odd, but they're social graces. Remember, I spent all my time on a boat, or when I came home to the farm. I was never a big social person. I had my friends that would come to the house, we'd hang out in the garage or something. But I'm not that guy that goes and hangs out. I just don't run in a big social circle. So I was always surrounded by people that knew me or whatever. And, in Tim, it's going to sound weird, injecting yourself into a conversation. And I'd like to know any towboaters out there that have experienced the same phenomenon. When you sit around a group of people and talk, there's not a hierarchy, there's just a flow. Okay, I was used to, if I popped down the stairs and all the deckhands are in the galley talking, I didn't have to wait my turn to interject.
Right.
I was captain of the boat. Matter of fact, most of the time when you walk in the room, the focus of conversation changes to, hey, Cap, what's up? Or this, that, the other, and they redirect their focus to you. So when you come shoreside and you're interacting with these people, you automatically think you can just walk up and hijack the conversation.
Right.
and so it was really socially hard to come shoreside, and the frustration of teamwork. Yes, there is no greater example of teamwork than a towboat, but it's a different kind of team. It's a camaraderie. It's a family. It's one of the tightest teams you'll ever be involved with.
Right.
But it's not collaborative teamwork, so to speak. It's rank and file teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
When you come, and it relies very much on it's an apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. You learn from the man in front of you.
Right.
Okay, so if all this makes sense, and I'll probably butcher this, but if all this makes sense, here you are coming from a society where everybody is either below you or above you. And typically, the person you turn to answer your questions is the subject matter expert that's been doing it the longest, which is, typically it could be your lead man or your mate, and then, probably it's your captain, but you learn who does what the best. Then you come shoreside and you've got this whole dynamic of these social collaborations where, it's a give and take. I never came from that environment. I started at 18 years old in an environment where you're either telling somebody what to do or doing what you're told.
Right.
You don't buck rank. And hierarchy has a privilege. I'm sorry. That might sound bad to people, but there's a lot of truth to it. Now, you got some captains that are more collaborative and some that are more inclusive. And I always thought that I was one of the guys that I ran my crew very, everybody's got an opinion and I want their opinion. I don't care to argue with people. But at the end of the day, the argument only went so far. Well, now here you are shoreside and you've got what's going to work. You know where you want to go, and you've got this team of 5 people, and they're not all wanting to go your way, and you're wanting to pull the rank card, and there is none.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so it's very stressful in that way. So I told everybody, and this is a joke, but I told everybody for the first year I was shoreside or so, I felt like the little puppy running around peeing on the floor, and everybody spotted me with a newspaper. you know, you can't do that.
Right.
Why can't I? It just don't work that way. And I learned real fast. Oh, you want to talk about something that'll turn you into an enemy in the shoreside office environment quicker than anything is don't ever play the trump card because you've never been there.
Right.
You've got to find a way to explain it to them where they understand that environment. Don't just slam the trump card down. That don't fly well. The whole transition from vessel to shore was very tough on me. I don't know if it is on everybody. I would hope to God it ain't. I would hope that's just my unique personality quirks that make it that way. Being very outspoken, very opinionated. That's another thing. My dad used to always tell me that opinion is a privilege, not a right.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has a right to their opinion. Oh, you got a right to your opinion. You keep it to yourself. Nobody wants to listen to it. The only time your opinion becomes something of importance is when you have enough respect from the people around you to want to listen to what you got to say.
Sure.
I think we forget that as a society sometimes.
Yeah.
And I definitely forgot it when I came shoreside because I thought my opinion ought to be heard by everybody, sometimes loudly. And I was real quick to tell them why I thought I was right.
Mm-hmm.
It was a definite culture shock. I love it. I'll tell you what I loved about it most. I have never once felt stressed in managing boats, being an operations manager.
Okay.
I tell a lot of people my definition of stress is when you're making a decision that you have not the skills nor the knowledge to answer affirmatively.
Mm-hmm.
If you know what you're doing and you're confident in your knowledge and your ability, and you're making decisions that are in your realm, then there should be no stress in making decisions because you ought to know the right answer. So if you've got to stress over something, then I think you're probably out of your league or over your head. I'm not saying you won't figure it out. I'm not saying it ain't good to push yourself. I'm just saying you're not confident in your knowledge and ability to just have the answer. So I've never felt stressed being an operations manager / port captain, however you want to say it, managing boats. But I sure felt stressed fitting into the social environments of everyday human beings going back and forth to work.
Yeah.
Um, the fact that you had to look at somebody and interact with somebody that you may or may not like and can't tell them that. Now
Yeah.
I know that's going to come across maybe bad on the radio, but there's a lot of truth to that, And I was when I was at home, I didn't have to worry about it because I only surrounded myself with people that I liked and enjoyed. When I was
Right.
a captain on a boat, I'm not saying that every once in a while a person didn't come through my boat that I didn't particularly care for or whatever, but as far as the core of my crew, people are going to gravitate to your boat and you're going to get people on your boat. And this happens with every boat out there that you all get along. You cannot spend a month at a time with 9 people and not end up gravitating toward a crew full of people that all like each other.
Sure.
You're either going to learn to like each other or you're going to pick people like each other because 2 people that have abrasive personalities are not going to stay on the boat together. There's either going to be a problem and the office is going to move them. One of them is going to get out of hand and get gone in some way, shape, or form, or they're just going to move on to the next boat until they find their place they feel at home. I told you about that trip where that Martha Denton was the first boat where I felt that click, that family, that bond, and those happen over time, and you finally find your boat that you feel at home with, and you stay there. So being in a place where you've got to work with somebody, and I'm not saying this is bad. I mean, this is life. This is things that everybody deals with. I had just never had to deal with it. Now, I know that sounds so simple and so rudimentary. That's teenage level, lessons that I'd never learned because I had never been in an environment where you had to smile and tolerate, so to speak. I mean, you do always, but I mean, I think you get what I'm trying to say.
I do.
Uh, um, it was difficult to adjust to that, and
Yeah.
then to shut it on and off. I lived in my job. My job was a family, so you develop that level of comfortability, and you maintained it.
Hmm.
Now you got to hop in the truck, drive to work, interact with these people from all kinds of thoughts and opinions, and that's needed. That's needed. I mean, you've got to have that. I see it now. 7 years later, I'm adjusted to it, and I think doing well in the environment. But so I see the need for the diversity. I definitely see the need for collaboration, and I'm not a big one on rule by committee, but it also don't need to be a monarch. It damn sure don't need to be a dictatorship.
Right.
So you got to have this collaboration, and you got to have these varying opinions that drives the organization toward change, and it's a system of checks and balances. But when you've never been there and you're coming into that, it's hard, and it was just hard for me to learn. And and like I said, I don't know. I'd be interested to know how many other people out there felt that same uncomfortableness when they came into a shoreside role.
Yeah.
If they and if I'm explaining it right, because it was very hard. This is going to sound silly, Tim, but one of the hardest things I had to learn was it ain't, because I'd get in trouble all the time, and my boss said he beat me up, and my boss is a real good friend of mine and has been since the boats. He came off the boats too, and love him to death. And I think we got a great friendship, and always have. But he was beating me up one day, and he was always telling me, "Quit talking so much." I'd look around, and man, I'd point to a dozen people. We had one guy that we all worked with that everybody knew, don't go talk to him after 3 o'clock if you want to go home at 5. And I'm like, why is he always down on me for talking too much? And I look at all these other people, and here I am. I felt like a fool, Tim. And I'm being just as transparent and heartfelt as I can be about this. Whatever, I was 47 years old. And it finally hit me. It's not that I was speaking too many words. It's not that I was talking too much. It was just I wasn't talking about anything anybody gave a crap about hearing.
Right.
You see what I mean? Because there again, I was in that world where, for one, the conversation that towboaters gravitate to and have when you're that bored and that isolated is radically different than anything anybody in a social circle would talk.
Right.
But for two, and I know this is going to sound so bad and so arrogant, but I think any mate or captain or pilot or chief engineer, anything, would understand it. And it ain't just the boats. It's people in other areas where subject matter experts are usually in the hierarchy of leadership. I was used to whatever I thought was the most important thing at the time was what we talked about.
Right.
And by the time I got off the boat, I was the guy with 25 years experience that had been a captain since I was young. So I was always the one with the answers, right? So I'm always the quote expert, whether I am or not. And that's another thing a lot of captains don't think about is everybody attributes them to always having the right answer, but they don't always have the right answer. That's where they live in their head.
At least there's an answer, right?
Yeah, that's right. At least there is an answer. Right? Yes. And so, but when you come into that environment, not everybody wants to hear it. So I learned a valuable lesson there in life at a late point. And you never stop learning. And I think my honesty and transparency in these conversations like this is to point out that you never stop learning and you never stop growing within yourself. But I realized right then, when people say you talk too much, it ain't a matter of how many minutes you occupy or dominate the conversation. And it ain't about how many words you say. It's about what you say. If people are interested and if you're communicating clearly, they'll listen all day and enjoy it.
Right.
I
Long
mean,
as it,
I love
long as it adds value.
adds value.
Yeah.
And I tell people that all the time. My standard answer, and I hope I'm getting more cultured and uh, more wisely in my ability to manage from
Mm-hmm.
shore as I did my ability to be a captain on a boat. 'Cause trust me, we're talking about me being a captain at 40, 45 years old. I wasn't always that good of a captain either.
Right.
I had my learning curve there too, right?
Sure.
No, nobody at 25 years old has got the business of being in charge of that kind of piece of equipment with that many people. And if you do succeed at it, you learn quick. And you usually learn from that 40-year-old mate that walks up in the wheelhouse and has a conversation like, listen here, you certain so and so, you know, and so that right there, being a young captain, taught me more than anything that age and experience have a lot more value than rank and title.
Sure.
And because I had to learn to listen to those people or I wouldn't have survived because I didn't have the knowledge. I damn sure didn't have the skill or the know-how. And I didn't have the God-given respect that gray hair and age brings with you. I didn't have
Right.
a wise, sagely appearance about it. But, I'm starting to kind of settle into that as I've been shoreside. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm still not great. I'm still not great at um, communication sometimes, and I'm still a little too outspoken about my opinion, and I'm still a little quick to judge. But I tell people all the time that if it don't add value to the mariner, why are we doing it?
Right.
And I learned that just like that right there from something as simple as somebody telling me I talk too much and me trying to figure out because I was so confused. What do you mean? I can look. I do talk a lot. I know, but I can look at a lot of people around here that talk a whole lot more than me.
Sure.
And they don't get told that all the time. Oh, maybe a joke gets made about how long they'll dominate you in a conversation. But if nobody is interested in the topic you talk about, if nobody cares, if nobody can pull value away from what you're saying, I listen to audiobooks, Tim, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll sit and listen to an audiobook all day long. I'll get up in the morning, put my earbuds in, fire up an audiobook. I'll be working on the farm. I'll be on the tractor. I'll listen to that book all day long, 16
Mm-hmm.
straight hours. And I never get tired of hearing it.
Right.
But it's adding value. It's a book I chose that
Right.
is either for sheer enjoyment and entertainment or for knowledge and education. It's adding value to my existence. But I can't put in a book that you said read that I have no interest in, that I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of.
Right.
You know, I couldn't listen to 101 Dalmatians and the four little kittens that lost their mittens all day long getting value out of it. I'd drive me nuts.
Mm-hmm.
About the third time playing that thing, I'd probably throw it in the trash. But that's kind of where we are thinking about it as people communicating with other people. If your audience, and I'm developing a program right now with peer-to-peer sharing, and I'm interviewing people to go out and do a certain job. And one of the things I tell them in the interview, I've got enough instructors. I've got enough people telling them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I've got policies dictating what they do and how they do it every day. I need the heart of a teacher.
Right.
I need somebody that when that person leaves the boat, people want them back. I need somebody that word travels the work they're doing, and people are calling me and saying, when can I get him on my boat?
Okay.
Because if you have people, it's funny about human beings. All human beings have to hate something or somebody. We've all got to have an outlet to vent. And the quickest way to get most human beings, and I'm going to say any higher intelligence animal because I got a dog here, it's the same way. If I tell him to do something, he'll do the opposite. If I ask him to do something, he'll do the opposite. But human beings, if you tell them to do something, there's a good chance they're going to lock up on you and do just the opposite to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
You've got to make them want to learn it. It's just like I said about you giving me a book and telling me to read it. Now, us sharing an idea, and I have respect for Tim. Oh, I'll read his book all day long. May or may not like it. We'll talk about it intelligently as to what we liked and didn't like about it.
Mm-hmm.
But when Tim comes to me as a supervisor and tells me, read this book and tell me what you think about it, I'm probably going to hate it. I may or may not read it, and I probably won't get a lot out of it. Just because, why do I need to read Tim's book? That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. We've heard it all the time. Think about it. That's your basic default knee-jerk reaction. But when I come to you and say, Tim, I notice you read books all the time. Can you give me one that'll help me? I'm really struggling here. The odds say if I've asked and I'm receptive, I'll learn something from what you give me. And that's what I tell these guys when I'm interviewing them. I got to have somebody that can go out and make them want them back. Because when they want you to come, they'll listen and they're receptive and they'll learn. And, communications on any level, in any organization, on any boat, I really always thought that when I walked out of the wheelhouse and I came into the galley, that my opinion mattered because I was the captain.
Right.
What I learned is my opinion mattered because they respected me enough to want it.
Sure.
I never got that until I came shoreside and had to relearn that and re-earn it. And it all hit me that one day because of my boss beating me up for a year or two or however long it was, I don't know, about talking too much and me being frustrated. You don't know how many times I've came home at night and said, talk to my wife about it. And she tried to explain it to me. Everybody tried to explain it to me. And one day, I can't remember who said it, but somebody told me, Turbo, it ain't a matter of how much you're saying. It's a matter of what you're saying and who you're saying it to.
Right.
I can have the same conversation with 5 different groups of people. 4 of them thought it was gibberish. And the one group would have embraced it and sit there and talked all day.
Right.
It only added value to that person. You got to know your audience. And you got to add value. And I'll tell you another thing I've learned from being shoreside it was a given on the boat. I never thought about it, but I always knew it because I was the captain. But when I came shoreside, I was just Mike. I just Turbo.
Mm-hmm.
You got to watch what you say.
Yeah.
Because somebody's always listening.
Right.
And good or bad, somebody's going to take your advice. Mm-hmm. So you better watch what you put out
there.
Sure. Good and bad, So yeah, long story to sum it up, Tim. That transition from vessel to shoreside at 45 years old, I have loved it. The last 7 years, I was so tired. My first love will always be a boat. I love running a boat. I love being a towboater. I told you when I made that decision how difficult it was. Mm-hmm. But I never regretted it.
Right.
My life has been so rich. And I've met so many people. And I've had so much help. And I feel like I have carved a path into a culture and that time is forgotten in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I would never trade it for anything in the world. But I was tired of doing the same job. I didn't realize how tired until I came shoreside.
Right.
And at 45 years old, to be opening up a new set of challenges like we just talked about, and to have to face these challenges and overcome these challenges, I really think it stopped me from being a dinosaur. It's reset my clock. Okay. I was really starting, I told you by the time they asked me to go and move rivers, get on the bigger rivers, I was too comfortable. I liked where I was. Mm-hmm. I didn't have anything to prove. I was at the top of my little bitty pile. Mm-hmm. And I liked it there. And I was comfortable. I had that big duck in a little puddle syndrome. And I liked my place in the food chain. And so to be able to cut the stress that was those first couple of years of shaking me out of that, stagnation that I developed in my own personal growth, that stress opened me up and I loved it. I loved the challenge. I loved being able to do something I didn't know how to do. Mm-hmm. I loved having I'm not saying there wasn't harder jobs. I'm not saying I was the best pilot by no means. No, I was not. And that was one of the things that made my job so much fun is I wasn't the best pilot. I had to work, and I love work, and I love working hard, and I don't handle boredom very well. My mind and idle time does not coincide.
Right.
Um, I've got to keep active and moving, and I love to work, and to come at 45 years old, and it was like walking to a gymnasium lined wall to wall with doors. And the stress came from being in this big gymnasium and not knowing which way to go and not knowing what door to open. And the stress came from opening the wrong door about 9 times out of 10 before I opened the right one.
Yep.
But man, once I got the map down pat, I love the growth and development that it presented me. And you know how many people get to totally change careers, totally change job paths, totally go in a new direction, get to reinvigorate themselves and work harder than they've ever worked in their life, struggle more interpersonally than they've ever struggled before, and get challenged to succeed when most people are winding their life down and getting ready for retirement. I'm winding up and trying to figure out how to succeed in a new environment. And I never had to switch companies. I never had to lose job security. I never had to lose money. The opportunities have been open to me have been overwhelming, and they've been awesome. And I wouldn't go back right now and change one single thing that's ever happened to me, Tim. I couldn't be happier. And it's the river and the people in it. And I'm a high school educated idiot. And I've been offered opportunities and a lifestyle and a monetary reward that most people with a college degree couldn't attain.
Right.
And it's because of the industry we have, the company. I'm going to say Ingram Barge Company is one of the finest out there. We're not the only one, but I'll tell you what makes Ingram one of the finest is at the core of our business, we still honor the traditions and the culture of the river.
Right.
We still reward, just like the examples I've used in my life, the people that work hard. We still believe in an apprenticeship, and we still believe, and this is not just Ingram, but this is most of your companies out there, that knowledge that is handed down through that apprenticeship of hand to mouth, through a man's career, is what makes this industry what it is. And
Right.
I think Ingram and a lot of other companies out there, we get it. And I couldn't find a better place to be in my life, to the point that I brought my son into it, and he worked on the boats, and now he's shoreside, and he works in fleet logistics, and wanting to get into barge logistics. And there's, I'll put it to you this way: take the name off the stacks, take anybody's company logo off. There is not a better industry, not a better group of people, not a more diverse, well-rounded. I always felt bad because I didn't go to college, so I spent a whole life on that boat being locked up. I would come with a satchel full of books every time I'd catch the boat. I'd have a backpack full of books. I couldn't spell all that well. I didn't do well in spelling, and probably because I didn't care about English that much. And so I started doing crossword puzzles. For about 3 or 4 years there, I did crossword puzzles every day, all day long. Book after book after book, crossword puzzles. And I carried dictionaries and thesauruses with me to expand my vocabulary, my knowledge of spelling. So I self-educated myself, and it was a hard road. But you'd be surprised how many people out there in them boats have a vast wealth of knowledge. If you think about it, a lot of guys come from all different areas, backgrounds, past works. If you're sitting on a boat and you're getting ready to remodel your house, and you want to put tile in the bathroom, ask around. I'll bet you know a towboater that in some previous life has hung tile. And they'll either come to your house and help you, or they'll tell you how to do it.
Right.
And I bump into people all the time, Tim. Back when they first opened that big Opry Mills Mall down in Nashville, Tennessee, I'm walking through the mall, and I hear somebody yell, "Hey, Turbo!" My wife gets a kick out of it. We've been in Louisville, we've been in St. Louis, we've been all over the place, and I cannot go somewhere that I don't recognize somebody or somebody recognize me. And I have met people from all over the United States, and I just about be hard pressed to say that there ain't very many towns within 50 mile of the river, from the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi, that you couldn't drop me off, and I couldn't make a couple phone calls and get somebody to come and help me.
Sure.
And that's the kind of tight knit group we. They might run and drift from company to company, but at the core of it, they're all a loyal group. Even people you don't like, you love them.
Yeah. No, I've been a part of this industry for about 7.5 years now, and I've found it to be one of the best kept secrets in the country here.
Yeah. I don't know of any other, maybe the military, but I don't know of any other industry that has the connected brotherhood that we have amongst the river industry.
Right.
And I'm sure it's that way when you go like out east and you get in the maritime industry with the fishing and stuff and merchant mariners. We're our own little circles. But I can tell you this: there might be other groups like us, but there's no group better than us.
I'll take that.
Our people do it. Our people do it well.
Yeah.
And we're good. And at the heart of us, we're good people. So,
well, listen, Turbo, I appreciate you sharing your story and taking the time with me here today.
Okay, man. Be careful, Tim. Thanks for that invite.
Thanks a lot, sir. Talk to you later on.